You wake up to the sound of snow falling on bamboo. It's barely dawn in the winter of 1185, and the world outside your sliding paper doors is painted in shades of gray and white that match the color your soul is about to become. The tammy mat beneath you is cold, unforgiving like everything else in this life you've chosen. Or perhaps the life that chose you. Your breath creates small clouds in the frigid air of your modest room. There's no luxury here, no warmth beyond. What discipline can provide? A single oil lamp flickers near your low wooden table, its flame dancing like the souls of the ancestors you pray are watching over you. They'll need to be, because today everything you've believed about honor, loyalty, and the sacred bonds between warriors is about to shatter like thin ice under a horse's hoof. The servant who slides open your door moves like a ghost, silent, efficient, invisible. This is how all servants move in a samurai household. To be seen is to risk death. To be heard is to invite punishment. She places the letter beside your futon with hands that tremble, though whether from cold or fear, you cannot tell. In this world, they're often the same thing. You don't need to look at the seal to know what this is. You can smell betrayal the way you can smell death. It has a particular scent, like copper mixed with cherry blossoms. Sweet and metallic, beautiful and deadly. The letter bears the mon of your closest ally, the man who stood beside you at your Genpuku ceremony when you first took adult names, who held your firstborn son and declared him strong like his father, the man who has just sold your family to your enemies for 30 pieces of rice and the promise of better lands. Your fingers, trained to grip a katana without trembling even in the face of certain death, shake as they break the wax seal. The paper feels heavier than your armor, more dangerous than any blade ever forged. Because words, you're learning, can cut deeper than steel. They can slice through decades of brotherhood, sever bonds that were supposed to be stronger than blood, stronger than death itself. The message is brief. It's always brief when it destroys your world. The Taira know about the rice shipments. They know about the hidden weapons. They know about your son's location. I told them. The gold was too much to refuse, and my family's hunger was too great to ignore. By the time you read this, they will already be moving. I am sorry, but sorry doesn't fill empty bellies or buy safety in these times. Perhaps in our next life, we can be true friends again. Yoshimura, you read it 3 times. The first time, your mind refuses to accept the words. They slide off your consciousness like water off oiled paper. The second time, your body understands before your heart does. Your hands begin to shake. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your vision blurs at the edges. The third time, something inside you dies. Not your body, that death would be a mercy. Something deeper dies. Something that can never be resurrected. Trust. Honor. The belief that some things in this world are sacred. Outside, the snow continues to fall, each flake a tiny samurai performing seppuku against the ground, surrendering its individual beauty to become part of something larger, something white and pure and cold. You will spend the next several minutes staring at that snow, watching those tiny deaths, understanding that you are witnessing a perfect metaphor for your own existence. Because you, too, are about to become something cold and pure and deadly. This is what betrayal feels like in the body of a samurai. It starts as a small hole in your chest, no bigger than the point of a tanto. But then it spreads like poison, like fire, like the slowly creeping realization that everything you've built, your life upon, is as fragile as rice paper in rain. Your ancestors, the ones whose spirits live in your katana, whose honor flows through your veins like sacred blood, they are screaming. Not in anger at your betrayer, but in rage at you, because you trusted, because you let your guard down, because you forgot the most fundamental truth of samurai existence. In a world where honor is the only currency that matters, betrayal is not just murder, it's genocide. It kills not just you, but everyone who came before you and everyone who will come after. Your family's name, carved in stone and spoken in reverence for 7 generations, is about to become a whisper of shame. Your son, if he survives what's coming, will carry the stain of your failure for the rest of his life. Your wife, if she chooses to live rather than follow you into death, will be known as the woman who married the fool who trusted the wrong man. This is what you're thinking about as you fold the letter with hands that have suddenly become very steady, because betrayal, you're discovering, has a peculiar effect on the samurai mind. It burns away everything soft, everything human, everything that isn't pure, distilled purpose. You are becoming what you were always trained to be but hoped never to become. A living weapon with only one target and only one way to find peace. The servant is still kneeling by your door, waiting for permission to leave, but you've forgotten. She exists. You've forgotten most of the world exists. There is only you and the letter and the growing certainty that before the next snow melts, either you will be dead or Yoshimura will be dead, or quite possibly both. Because that's how samurai deal with betrayal. Not with lawyers or negotiations or clever politics, though those tools have their place. They deal with it the way their ancestors have dealt with it for centuries, with steel and fire and the absolute, uncompromising application of a code. That values death over dishonor. You're about to learn that this code is both your salvation and your damnation. It will give you the strength to do what must be done, but it will also ensure that no matter how perfectly you execute your revenge, you will never be the same person who woke up this morning believing in friendship. The snow outside is getting heavier. Each flake is still performing its tiny seppuku, but now they seem to be falling faster, as if the sky itself is eager to cover the world in a blanket of pure white silence. You find this oddly comforting. In a few hours, when word of Yoshimura's betrayal spreads through the compound like wildfire, when the preparations for war begin in earnest, when you start the process of hunting down a man who once shared sake with you under cherry blossoms, the snow will make everything quiet. And in that quiet, you will begin to plan. Still think being a samurai was all honor and glory? This was just the moment betrayal arrived. The real nightmare is what comes next. Your compound exists in a state of beautiful, terrible order. Every stone in the garden has been placed with the precision of a master swordsman's cut. Every pine tree has been trained to grow in perfect harmony with its neighbors. Every servant knows exactly how many steps to take, exactly how low to bow, exactly how quietly to breathe so as not to disturb the meditation of their masters. This order isn't accidental. It's not decorative. It's survival. In a world where the wrong word can start a war, where the slightest breach of etiquette can result in death, where honor is measured in microscopic increments and recorded by ancestors who never forget. Perfect. Order is the only barrier between civilization and chaos. Your compound is a physical manifestation of Bushido made manifest in wood and stone and the lives of everyone who lives within its walls. The main building where you sleep sits at the heart of this miniature universe, elevated slightly above. The other structures to remind everyone servants, family members, visitors, enemies of the hierarchy that governs all relationships. The foundation stones were blessed by monks who fasted for 7 days before speaking the prayers that would make this ground sacred. The wooden beams were cut from trees that grew on your ancestral lands, each one carrying the spiritual essence of soil that has been watered with the blood of your forefathers. This isn't just architecture. This is genealogy made visible. Your room, sparse as it appears to eyes trained on comfort, contains everything a samurai needs to live and die with honor. The katana and wakizashi that rest on their wooden stand aren't just weapons. They're the physical embodiment of your soul, forged by smiths who understood that they were creating not just tools for cutting, but repositories for the warrior. Spirit itself. The steel holds memories. Every battle fought by previous owners, every moment of perfect technique, every death given and received with proper form. The family altar in the corner holds the Ihai wooden tablets inscribed with the names of ancestors stretching back 13 generations. Each morning and evening, you burn incense before these tablets, not out of religious obligation, but out of practical necessity. These dead relatives aren't gone. They're your advisors, your moral compass, your invisible army. When you make decisions, you're not just choosing for yourself. You're choosing for every samurai who shares your blood, both those who came before and those who will come after. In the garden visible through your sliding doors, the carefully raked gravel creates patterns that change with the seasons and your family's fortunes. When times are good, the patterns flow like peaceful rivers. When war threatens, they become sharp, angular, like the edge of a blade. Today, in the aftermath of Yoshimura's letter, you notice that the gravel looks like scars, long, pale lines that speak of wounds that will never fully heal. The servants who maintain this compound aren't just employees. They're part of an extended family structure that makes everyone complicit in everyone else's honor or shame. The woman who brought you the letter this morning? Her grandfather served your grandfather. Her loyalty to your family isn't just professional, it's generational, spiritual, absolute. If you die in disgrace, she dies in disgrace. If your family's name is honored, her family shares in that honor. This is why betrayal is so devastating in samurai society. It doesn't just affect individuals, it tears holes in a social fabric that has been woven over centuries, destroying relationships and obligations that stretch back through time like roots of an ancient tree. The other buildings in your compound house various members of your extended household, your wife and children, your younger brother who serves as your second in command, the master-at-arms who trains your soldiers, the elderly advisor who knew your father and remembers stories that predate written records, the priest who maintains your family's spiritual obligations, and the various retainers whose families have served yours for generations. Each of these people woke up this morning as part of a stable, honorable household. By sunset, depending on how you handle Yoshimura's betrayal, they might all be dead, exiled, or marked for life as associates of a dishonored family. Their fate is entirely in your hands, and they know it. You can see it in their faces as news of the betrayal begins to spread through the compound like smoke from a fire that will soon consume everything. The dojo, where you train every morning. Before dawn sits at the eastern edge of the compound, positioned so that you practice your kata facing the rising sun. The floor is polished smooth by decades of feet moving in the precise patterns that transform human bodies into weapons. The wooden practice swords are worn smooth by thousands of hours of repetition, each one shaped by the grip of countless hands learning to kill with grace and precision. Today, that dojo feels different. The air itself seems heavier, charged with the kind of energy that precedes storms. Because betrayal doesn't just change the betrayed, it changes everything around them. The very buildings seem to understand that they're about to witness something that will alter the spiritual balance of this place forever. The walls are thin here paper and wood, designed for elegance rather than privacy. This means that conversations carry, that whispers become public knowledge, that secrets have nowhere to hide. In normal times, this architectural transparency promotes harmony by making deception difficult. But now, in the aftermath of discovering that your closest ally has sold your family's secrets, the thin walls feel like a trap. Every conversation will be overheard. Every plan will be scrutinized. Every emotion will be public property. Privacy in this world is a luxury that only the truly powerful can afford. And right now, having been betrayed by someone who knew all your secrets, you're discovering that you might not be as powerful as you believed. The compound's location, nestled in a valley between two hills with a river running along its southern border, was chosen by your great-grandfather for both its beauty and its defensive advantages. The hills provide natural fortification against attack, while the river offers an escape route if the compound becomes untenable. But these same geographical features that once provided security now feel like walls of a prison, because betrayal transforms every advantage into a disadvantage, every safe place into a potential trap. Your ancestors designed this compound to be a fortress of honor. They never imagined it might become a mausoleum for trust. The servants are moving differently now, their usual grace replaced by the careful, measured steps of people who understand they're walking through a minefield, because they know what you're only beginning to comprehend. When a samurai discovers he's been betrayed, the resulting explosion of violence tends to consume everyone in its vicinity, guilty and innocent alike. The morning routine that usually brings order and peace, the ritual cleaning, the careful preparation of meals, the tending of gardens, the maintenance of weapons continues, but with an undercurrent of barely controlled panic. Because everyone understands that this might be the last normal morning this compound ever sees. In the distance, barely audible above the sound of falling snow, you can hear the temple bells marking the hours. Each ring reminds you that time is passing, that somewhere out there, Yoshimura is either preparing for war or preparing to die, and that every moment you spend in contemplation is one less moment. You have to decide how to respond to his betrayal. The bells also remind you of something else. In Buddhism, every action creates consequences that ripple through time like stones thrown into still water. Your response to this betrayal won't just affect you and Yoshimura, it will create waves that touch every person in both your households, every ally and enemy, every servant and soldier, every child who carries your bloodline and every ancestor whose spirit inhabits your weapons. This is the weight of being samurai. Your personal choices become historical events. Your private pain becomes public legacy. Your individual honor becomes collective identity. Still think this was a simpler time? This was just your house. The real complexity is what happened inside your head when you realized that everything you trusted could be bought and sold. Betrayal among samurai isn't just personal treachery. It's spiritual vandalism. The deliberate desecration of sacred bonds that connect the living to the dead and the present to eternity. When Yoshimura put brush to paper and wrote those words, that shattered your world. He wasn't just breaking his promise to you. He was severing threads in the cosmic tapestry that binds all honorable men together, creating holes in reality itself that can only be mended with blood. In the rigid hierarchy of samurai society, relationships aren't casual associations that can be discarded when convenient. They're sacred contracts witnessed by ancestors, blessed by kami, and recorded in the spiritual ledgers that determine not just your fate in this life, but your soul's destination in the next. When you and Yoshimura performed the sake-sharing ceremony that made you sworn brothers, you weren't just making a promise. You were creating a metaphysical bond that was supposed to be stronger than flesh, more permanent than bone. The specific nature of his betrayal makes it particularly heinous. Military secrets, the location of your son, the timing of rice shipments, the hidden weapons caches, these aren't just tactical information. They're the lifeblood of your family's survival, entrusted to him because you believed his honor was identical to your own. By selling these secrets to the Taira, he hasn't just endangered your physical safety. He's murdered your ability to trust, which for a samurai is a kind of spiritual castration, because samurai society functions on the assumption that honor is absolute and loyalty is unbreakable. Remove those assumptions, and the entire social structure collapses like a house of cards in an earthquake. Your betrayal by Yoshimura doesn't just affect your personal relationship, it calls into question every alliance, every friendship, every sworn oath in your entire circle of influence. If Yoshimura could be bought, who else among your allies might be secretly negotiating their own price? The historical precedents for this kind of betrayal are written in blood across the annals of samurai history. During the Genpei War, which rages around you even now, the Minamoto clan has been torn apart by internal betrayals that make Yoshimura's treachery seem almost quaint by comparison. Minamoto no Yoritomo had his own brother, Yoshitsune, hunted down and killed because he suspected him of disloyalty. The Hajj clan systematically eliminated potential rivals through a combination of political maneuvering and assassination that turned the concept of family loyalty into a cruel joke. These aren't aberrations, they're the inevitable result of a system that places absolute value on honor while existing in a world where honor is constantly tested by necessity, greed, fear, and the simple human desire to survive. The very code that makes samurai society possible also makes it incredibly fragile, because it requires every individual to choose death over dishonor, loyalty over survival, abstract principles over concrete needs. Yoshimura's betrayal reveals the fundamental contradiction at the heart of Bushido. It demands superhuman virtue from human beings, who possess very human weaknesses. His letter mentions his family's hunger, the gold that was too much to refuse, the practical necessities. That made betrayal seem like the lesser of evils. These aren't excuses, they're explanations that highlight how the samurai code creates impossible choices between equally valid obligations. Should he have let his children starve to preserve his oath to you? Should he have watched his wife waste away from hunger rather than accept gold that could save her life? The code says yes, absolutely, without question. Honor comes before everything, including the lives of the people you love most. But the human heart, even the heart of a trained warrior, rebels against such calculations. This is why betrayal is so common among samurai and why the punishments for it are so severe. The code itself creates the conditions that make betrayal almost inevitable while simultaneously declaring it the ultimate sin. It's a system designed to produce both heroes and monsters, often in the same person. The psychological impact of betrayal on the betrayed samurai is profound and lasting. You're not just dealing with the practical consequences of having your secrets sold to enemies, you're dealing with the complete collapse of your worldview. Every memory you have of Yoshimura is now contaminated with the knowledge of his treachery. Every moment of camaraderie, every shared meal, every battle fought side by side, all of it has been retroactively poisoned by his betrayal. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of betrayal. It doesn't just destroy the present and future. It murders the past. The good times you shared with Yoshimura didn't actually happen because they were built on lies. The trust you felt was delusion. The brotherhood you cherished was performance. You're not just losing a friend, you're discovering that the friend never existed in the first place. The samurai response to this kind of spiritual devastation is codified in law and custom. Katakuchi, the right of legal revenge, isn't just permitted, it's required. If you fail to seek appropriate vengeance for this betrayal, you become complicit in it. Your own honor becomes questionable. Your ancestors will refuse to acknowledge you in the afterlife. Your descendants will inherit your shame along with your name, but revenge isn't simple in samurai society. It must be proportional, appropriate, and conducted according to strict rules that preserve the honor of both the betrayed and the betrayer. A badly executed revenge can become its own form of dishonor, adding shame to injury rather than washing away the stain of betrayal. The options available to you are limited and each carries its own risks. Direct confrontation challenging Yoshimura to single combat is the most honorable approach, but it assumes he'll accept the challenge and fight fairly. If he refuses or tries to use his advanced knowledge of your plans against you, you could end up dead while he lives on in prosperity and shame. Assassination is more practical but less honorable. Killing him from ambush or through poison removes the risk of defeat in fair combat, but it also makes you an assassin rather than a warrior. Your ancestors might approve of the result while disapproving of the method. Political destruction using your influence and allies to destroy his reputation and livelihood is the subtlest approach, but it requires allies you can trust, and Yoshimura's betrayal has called the trustworthiness of all your allies into question. How do you know the people you're asking for help aren't already negotiating their own deals with your enemies? There's also the nuclear option, seppuku, ritual, suicide to wash away the shame of having been so thoroughly deceived. This would preserve your honor while simultaneously condemning Yoshimura to live with the knowledge that his betrayal drove an honorable man to his death. But seppuku is permanent, and it abandons your family to face the consequences of your betrayal without your protection. Each of these options has been chosen by samurai in similar circumstances throughout history, and each has created its own legend, its own cautionary tale, its own addition to the growing catalog of stories that teach future generations how honor and betrayal dance together in the complex choreography of warrior society. The truth is that betrayal doesn't just happen to individual samurai, it's built into the very structure of the society they've created. A system based on absolute loyalty and perfect honor, operating in a world of limited resources and competing interests, generates the exact conditions that make betrayal both inevitable and unforgivable. You're not just the victim of Yoshimura's personal weakness. You're the latest casualty in an ongoing war between human nature and superhuman ideals, between the world as it is and the world as Bushido insists it should be. Still think honor was simple in ancient Japan? This was just one betrayal. The real nightmare is that it was happening everywhere, all the time, because the system itself made it impossible to avoid. Food loses its flavor when you're planning to kill someone who once shared your table. The rice that arrives with your morning meal, perfectly prepared by servants who've been doing this for generations, tastes like ash mixed with sand. Every grain seems to scratch your throat as you swallow, as if your body is rejecting sustenance while your mind focuses on death. But you eat anyway, because planning revenge requires strength, and strength requires fuel, even if that fuel now tastes like grave dirt and regret. The meal itself is a masterpiece of precision that would normally bring you peace. The rice is cooked to that perfect point where each grain maintains its individual integrity while blending harmoniously with its neighbors, a metaphor for samurai society that now strikes you as bitterly ironic. The miso soup, made from soybeans that have been fermented for exactly 3 years, carries the deep, complex flavor of time itself. The grilled fish, caught fresh from the river that runs beside your compound, should remind you of the simple pleasures that make life worth living. Instead, everything reminds you of betrayal. The rice reminds you of the grain shipments that Yoshimura sold to your enemies, information about timing and routes that will now be used to starve your allies into submission. The miso reminds you of the long fermentation process that true loyalty requires, the slow development of trust that can only happen over years of shared hardship. The fish reminds you of how easily something living and free can be trapped, killed, and consumed by those clever enough to know its habits. You eat mechanically, without pleasure, fueling your body for the work ahead while your mind runs through possibilities. Assassination requires energy. Challenging someone to single combat demands physical strength. Even seppuku, if it comes to that, must be performed with perfect form. And perfect form requires steady hands and clear thoughts that only come from a properly nourished body. The tea ceremony that follows breakfast becomes a meditation on irony. The careful, precise movements that normally bring harmony to your spirit now feel like practice for violence. The way you grip the tea bowl firm, but gentle, controlling without crushing, is exactly how you must grip your katana when the time comes to use it. The measured breathing that accompanies each step of the ceremony is the same breathing technique that will keep you calm when you're face to face with the man who destroyed your trust. Tea masters teach that the ceremony represents the transformation of simple elements, hot water, powdered leaves, ceramic clay, into something transcendent through the application of perfect technique and pure intention. Today, you understand that revenge follows the same principle. Simple elements, anger, steel, opportunity, can be transformed into something that serves justice through the application of perfect technique and pure intention. The bitter taste of the tea matches your mood perfectly. Matcha isn't supposed to be sweet. Its value lies in its complexity, its ability to awaken all your senses simultaneously. Its reminder that the most profound experiences often carry an edge of discomfort. Like honor, like loyalty, like the price you're about to pay for living according to principles that most people abandon when they become inconvenient. Your wife enters the room. As you're finishing your tea, moving with the fluid grace of someone who has spent her entire life walking on rice paper without tearing it. She says nothing. In samurai households, wives learn to read their husbands' moods through posture, breathing, and the way they hold their weapons. She can see from your stillness that something has gone catastrophically wrong, and from your controlled breathing that you're already planning how to fix it. She places a small plate of pickled vegetables beside your tea bowl. Daikon radish, cucumber, cabbage, each one precisely cut, perfectly seasoned. Beautiful enough to be ornamental, but practical enough to aid digestion. These aren't just food, they're medicine designed to help your body process the heavier elements of your meal while cleansing your palate for whatever comes next. Today, what comes next is violence. The pickled vegetables have been prepared using techniques passed down through generations of samurai wives, women who understood that their husband's ability to fight effectively might depend on how well their digestive systems were functioning. The salt content is calibrated to maintain proper fluid balance during physical exertion. The acidity helps the body absorb nutrients more efficiently. The crunch provides sensory stimulation that keeps the mind alert. Everything in a samurai household serves multiple purposes. Nothing is purely decorative, purely functional, or purely pleasurable. Even food becomes part of the warrior's arsenal. And today you're eating like a man preparing for war. But the hunger you're really trying to satisfy can't be fed with rice and fish and perfectly pickled vegetables. The emptiness in your stomach is nothing compared to the void in your chest where trust used to live. You could eat every grain of rice in Japan and still feel hollow, because what you're really hungry for is the impossible, a return to the innocence that allowed you to believe Yoshimura's friendship was real. Between meals, you find yourself standing in your kitchen garden, staring at the vegetables that grow in neat rows like soldiers prepared for inspection. Radishes, onions, garlic, ginger, each plant growing according to its nature, following the seasons, producing what it was designed to produce without deception or betrayal. Plants don't lie. They don't make promises they don't intend to keep. They don't smile while plotting your destruction. This is perhaps why so many samurai become obsessed with gardening as they age. After decades of navigating human treachery, there's something profoundly comforting about organisms that are exactly what they appear to be. You pull a daikon radish from the earth, brush off the soil, and bite into it raw. It's sharp, clean, honest, It tastes exactly like what it is, nothing more and nothing less. For a moment, this simple honesty is more satisfying than any elaborate meal prepared by master chefs. But then you remember that this garden exists only because of the protection you provide, and that protection depends on alliances and trust and all the other fragile human constructions that Yoshimura's betrayal has called into question. Even this simple pleasure eating vegetables from your own soil is built on foundations that can be destroyed by human treachery. The sake you drink that evening burns your throat like liquid fire, but you welcome the pain because it matches the fire in your chest. This isn't the smooth, refined sake served at formal ceremonies. This is rough country sake, the kind that farmers drink after 16-hour days in the rice paddies, designed to deliver maximum alcoholic impact with minimum concern for subtle flavors. Tonight, you don't want subtle flavors. You want something that burns, something that reminds you that you're still alive despite feeling like something essential inside you has died. The alcohol doesn't dull the pain of betrayal. If anything, it sharpens it, strips away the civilized restraint that normally keeps your rage contained within acceptable boundaries. This is dangerous, because samurai who lose control while under the influence of alcohol tend to make decisions that they wake up regretting, assuming they wake up at all. But danger feels appropriate right now. Control, restraint, careful consideration, these are the qualities that allowed you to trust Yoshimura in the first place. Maybe a little dangerous impulsiveness is exactly what the situation requires. You drink alone, which breaks one of the fundamental rules of samurai alcohol consumption. Sake is supposed to be shared, part of the social bonding that reinforces loyalty and brotherhood. Drinking alone suggests antisocial tendencies, inability to maintain proper relationships, possibly even mental instability, all of which might be accurate descriptions of what you're becoming. The food you eat while planning revenge becomes a kind of communion with your own darkness. Each meal is a step away from the man you were this morning and toward the man you need to become to survive what's coming. The taste of ash in your mouth isn't just psychological, it's spiritual preparation for the fact that everything your mouth isn't just psychological. It's spiritual preparation for the psychological. It's spiritual preparation for the fact that everything your mouth isn't just psychological. It's spiritual preparation for psychological. About to do will leave you covered in the ashes of burned bridges, destroyed relationships, and possibly your own soul. Still think samurai were above human weaknesses like hunger and thirst? This was just breakfast. The real appetite you're trying to satisfy is for justice, and that's a hunger that can never be completely filled. The weight of your armor begins not with steel and leather, but with the spiritual burden of putting on the physical manifestation of your ancestors' honor. Each piece of equipment you don as you prepare to confront Yoshimura's betrayal carries the accumulated weight of 7 generations of warriors who wore similar gear into battles that determined not just their own fate, but the fate of their bloodline for centuries to come. The process begins before dawn in the pre-light darkness. That samurai have always considered the most honest time of day. Darkness strips away pretense, reveals truth, forces you to rely on senses other than sight. In darkness, you can't see your reflection, can't be distracted by vanity or self-consciousness. There is only you, your equipment, and the task ahead. Your fundoshi, the loincloth that serves as the foundation garment for all. Samurai clothing is made of silk that was blessed by monks before being woven. This isn't superstition. It's practical spirituality. The silk that touches your skin carries prayers for protection, strength, and honor. When you tie it around your waist, you're literally wrapping yourself in the good intentions of holy men who understand that warfare is as much spiritual combat as physical violence. the undergarments that follow white silk that will be invisible beneath. Your armor, but serves as a barrier between your skin and the metal that might save your life, are perfectly clean, perfectly fitted, perfectly maintained. Samurai who die in battle are often stripped by enemies or allies seeking to claim valuable armor, and there's a particular shame associated with being found in dirty or poorly maintained undergarments. Even in death, you represent your families. Standards. Today, as you dress for what might be your final confrontation, the cleanliness of your undergarments feels like a prayer to ancestors who might be watching. If you die today, you want them to see that you maintain proper standards even when facing betrayal and possible death. The hakama, the pleated trousers that give samurai their distinctive silhouette, are made of heavy silk dyed the deep blue-black. That indicates your rank and clan affiliation. The pleats aren't decorative. They're functional, designed to disguise the movement of your legs during combat while allowing full range of motion for techniques that require flexibility. The way the fabric falls also creates optical illusions that make it difficult for enemies to judge distance and timing when you're moving. But today the hakama feel less like clothing and more like a shroud. The deep color reminds you of night sky, of endings, of the darkness that's about to swallow whatever relationship you thought you had with Yoshimura. Each pleat catches the morning light like a fold in reality, reminding you that nothing is quite what it appears to be, that surfaces can deceive, that even familiar things can hide dangerous truths. The kasode, the robe that serves as your outer garment, bears your family mon embroidered in silk thread that cost more than most people earn in a year. The crest isn't just identification. It's a spiritual anchor that connects you to every ancestor who wore the same symbol into battle. When enemies see your mon, they're not just seeing your personal identity. They're seeing the accumulated reputation of everyone who ever shared your bloodline. This morning, that reputation feels more like a burden than a blessing. Because if you handle Yoshimura's betrayal poorly, if you allow emotion to override judgment, if you act in ways that bring dishonor to your family name, then every ancestor who ever wore this crest will have their own honor diminished by your failure. Pressure is extraordinary. You're not just dressing yourself, you're putting on the accumulated expectations of the dead. The tabi split-toe socks that allow maximum flexibility while providing protection are made of deer leather so fine it's almost transparent. Your feet, in tabi, become weapons capable of silent movement, precise placement, instant response to changes in terrain or enemy positioning. Today, as you pull them on, you're conscious that these might be the last socks you ever wear, and there's something absurdly comforting about the fact that they're beautiful, well-made, worthy of being your final clothing. The waraji straw sandals that seem crude compared to the sophisticated clothing they accompany are actually masterpieces of functional design. The straw is woven in patterns that provide maximum grip on wet surfaces, maximum ventilation to prevent foot rot during long campaigns, maximum durability for extensive walking or running. The straps are positioned to distribute weight evenly, while allowing the sandals to be removed quickly if you need to fight barefoot. But straw sandals are also symbolic. They remind you that no matter how sophisticated your armor, how sharp your swords, how refined your techniques, you're still fundamentally human, still dependent on simple materials drawn from the earth, still connected to the farmers and craftsmen whose work makes your warrior lifestyle possible. Today, this connection to common humanity feels both humbling and strengthening. Yoshimura's betrayal was motivated by very human needs: hunger, fear, greed. Your response will be governed by very human emotions: anger, hurt, desire for justice. The straw sandals remind you that even samurai are just people trying to survive in a difficult world, and that understanding your own humanity is the first step toward understanding your enemies. Now comes the armor itself, and with it, The transformation. From human being to living weapon. The chest armor that protects your vital organs is made of iron plates, laced together with silk cords in patterns that have been tested in thousands of battles over centuries. Each plate is shaped to deflect blows rather than absorb them, channeling the force of enemy attacks away from your body while distributing the impact across the strongest parts of the armor structure. As you lift the dew over your head and settle it onto your shoulders, you feel the weight of protection and the weight of commitment. This armor represents a substantial investment, financial, spiritual, practical. Samurai families often go into debt to purchase proper armor for their warriors, understanding that the cost of good protection is always less than the cost of losing a trained fighter to inadequate equipment. But armor is also a statement of intent. When you put on full battle gear, you're announcing to the world that you're prepared to fight, prepared to kill, prepared to die. There's no backing down once you're armored. No claiming that you were just having a conversation that got out of hand. Armor means war, and war means that someone won't be going home. The sewed shoulder guards that protect your arms, while allowing full range of motion, are attached with cords that you tie with the same precision you use for sword techniques. Sloppy knots can mean death if your armor comes apart during combat, but overly tight knots can restrict movement or circulation. The balance between security and flexibility in armor mirrors the balance you need to maintain in life. Protected enough to survive, flexible enough to adapt. Today, as you tie the sewed cords, you're thinking about flexibility and adaptation in the context of Yoshimura's betrayal. How do you adapt to the discovery that your closest ally has become your enemy? How do you maintain the flexibility needed to respond to new information while staying committed to principles that don't bend? The coat-armored sleeves that protect your forearms while leaving your hands free for weapon manipulation are perhaps the most complex pieces of your armor. They must be strong enough to stop sword cuts, flexible enough to allow precise finger movements, and lightweight enough to avoid throwing off your balance during extended combat. As you slide your arms into the coat, you're reminded of all the times Yoshimura helped you with this process. Armor is difficult to put on alone, and samurai traditionally help each other dress for battle. The intimacy of the process, checking each other's knots, adjusting straps, ensuring that everything fits properly, creates bonds of trust and mutual dependence that are supposed to be unbreakable. The memory of Yoshimura's hands adjusting your armor, his voice reminding you to check this strap or tighten that cord, his presence making you feel safer and more confident. These memories are now contaminated by the knowledge of his betrayal. Every kindness becomes suspect. Every helpful gesture becomes potential manipulation. Every moment of camaraderie becomes evidence of your own stupidity. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of betrayal by someone close to you. It doesn't just destroy the relationship going forward, it murders the relationship retroactively, making you question every moment of trust, every expression of friendship, every shared experience that once brought you joy. The heyday thigh guards that protect your legs while allowing the mobility needed for mounted combat are attached with cords that pass between your legs and around your waist. The process is intimate, requiring you to handle parts of your body that are normally private, reminding you of your physical vulnerability even as you're putting on armor designed to protect that vulnerability. Today, this vulnerability feels especially acute. Yoshimura knows your fighting style, your preferred techniques, your habitual patterns in combat. If you face him in battle, you'll be fighting someone who has observed your training for years, who knows exactly how you move, exactly where you're likely to be vulnerable. The armor that protects you from strangers might be less effective against someone who helped you put it on. The Suniate shin guards that protect your lower legs while allowing you to run, jump, and kick complete the lower portion of your armor. They're designed to be both protective and intimidating, with metal plates that create sharp, angular silhouettes that make your legs look more like weapons than body parts. As you secure the Sunyate, you're thinking about the ground you'll need to cover to reach Yoshimura, the terrain you might need to cross, the possibility that you might need to run either toward danger or away from it. The armor makes you stronger and more protected, but it also makes you heavier and less agile. Every decision about what to wear is a decision about what kind of fight you're expecting and what kind of warrior you're choosing to become. The Kabuto Your helmet is the most personal and most symbolic piece of your armor. Made from dozens of curved metal plates riveted together in a design that's both beautiful and functional. It's crowned with a Medeta front crest that displays your personal symbol alongside your family mon. This helmet has been blessed by priests, decorated by master craftsmen, and worn into battles that have become family legends. When you place it on your head, you're not just protecting your skull, you're connecting with every ancestor who wore similar headgear into combat. The weight of the helmet reminds you of the weight of expectation, the responsibility that comes with representing not just yourself but your entire lineage. The Mempo, the face mask that covers the lower half of your face, is designed to serve multiple functions. It protects your jaw and throat from injury, creates a fearsome appearance that might intimidate enemies, and includes a series of small holes that allow you to breathe properly while muffling your voice in ways that make you sound less human and more supernatural. Today, as you tie the Mempo into place, you welcome the way it transforms your appearance. The man who trusted Yoshimura was human, vulnerable, capable of being deceived. The warrior looking back at you from your polished steel mirror is something else entirely. A manifestation of justice, an instrument of correction, a living embodiment of the consequences that follow betrayal. The final piece of your equipment isn't armor, it's your daisho, the matched pair of swords that serve as both weapons and spiritual repositories. The katana and wakizashi that you secure at your left side aren't just tools for cutting, they're the physical embodiment of your soul, forged by smiths who understood that they were creating not just weapons but sacred objects. As you slide the swords into your obi, you can feel their weight settling against your hip, familiar and comforting despite the gravity of what they represent. These blades have been blessed by priests, tested in combat, maintained with the kind of obsessive care that most people reserve for their children. They know you as well as you know them, and today they're eager to serve the purpose for which they were created. The process of arming yourself has taken nearly an hour, but it's an hour spent in meditation, preparation, spiritual transformation. The man who began this process was someone capable of being betrayed. The warrior who emerges from it is someone capable of correcting that betrayal through the application of perfect technique and pure intention. Looking at yourself in your polished steel mirror, you see not just a samurai prepared for battle, but a living weapon created by centuries of tradition, shaped by generations of ancestors, pointed toward a single target: the restoration of honor through the application of justice. Still think getting dressed was simple in feudal Japan? This was just putting on clothes. The real armor was psychological, and it was much heavier than steel. The routine that governs your days while planning revenge isn't chaos disguised as order, it's order refined into a weapon. Every ritual, every prayer, every moment of meditation becomes part of the process of transforming yourself from someone who has been betrayed into someone capable of correcting that betrayal with perfect, terrible precision. Dawn arrives like a gray ghost sliding through your paper windows, and with it comes the first ritual of what might be your final morning. Routine. The ablutions that begin each day: washing your face with cold water, rinsing your mouth, cleaning your hands take on new significance when performed by someone preparing for possible death. Each splash of water against your skin is a reminder that you're still alive, still capable of sensation, still responsible for actions that will echo through your family's history for generations. The water itself has been blessed by the priest who maintains your family's spiritual obligations. Drawn from the stream that runs past your compound, heated over fires fed by wood from trees that grew on your ancestral lands. Nothing in a samurai household is spiritually neutral, and today, even the act of washing your face becomes a prayer for purification, strength, and the kind of clarity that will allow you to see through Yoshimura's lies to the truth underneath. Prayer comes next, but not the rote recitation of familiar words that usually brings peace to your mornings. Today, kneeling before your family altar with its rows of ihai tablets inscribed with ancestors' names, you're engaged in a different kind of conversation with the dead. You're not asking for protection or guidance in the usual sense. You're asking for permission to do what needs to be done, for understanding of the consequences that will follow, for forgiveness in advance for what you're about to become. The incense you burn carries your prayers upward in smoke that mingles with the morning mist, but it also serves a practical purpose. The ritual of lighting it, watching it burn, breathing in its sacred fragrance calms your nervous system and focuses your mind on the eternal rather than the temporal. Your ancestors faced betrayals of their own. Some handled them well, others didn't. Their spirits, resident in your swords and watching from the afterlife, understand what you're going through in ways that no living person can. Speaking their names aloud, one by one, you're not just honoring their memory, you're drawing on their accumulated wisdom, their experience with violence and justice, and the terrible choices that honor sometimes requires. Each name you speak is a link in a chain that connects you to centuries of warriors who faced similar decisions, and their combined strength flows into you like water into a vessel. But today, some of those ancestral voices are arguing among themselves. The ones who died gloriously in battle urge immediate, direct action, challenge Yoshimura to single combat, settle this with steel and skill and the judgment of heaven. The ones who lived long enough to become strategists counsel patience, investigation, careful planning that accounts for all possible outcomes. The ones who witnessed the rise and fall of entire clans remind you that individual honor means nothing if your family doesn't survive to carry it forward. This internal debate, conducted through prayer and meditation with spirits who exist beyond the reach of betrayal, becomes the foundation for everything that follows. Weapons maintenance becomes the next form of prayer. Drawing your katana from its scabbard, you examine every inch of the blade in the growing morning light, looking for any signs of rust chips or imperfections that might affect its performance when performance becomes a matter of life and death. The steel is perfect, it always is, because neglecting your weapons is another form of dishonor. But the ritual of inspection isn't really about finding flaws in the metal dot, it's about achieving perfect familiarity with the tool you'll use to restore balance to a world thrown into chaos by betrayal. The cloth you use to polish. The blade has been blessed by priests and treated with oils that prevent corrosion while enhancing the steel's natural properties. Each stroke of the cloth along the edge is a meditation on sharpness, both physical and spiritual. The blade that emerges from this process isn't just clean, it's spiritually prepared for the work ahead, charged with your intention and blessed by your ancestors' approval. The wakizashi receives the same treatment, and then the tanto that serves as your final backup weapon. By the time you're finished, you've spent nearly an hour in communion with steel, and the swords know what's expected of them. They've been awakened from their peaceful rest and prepared for violence, their spirits aligned with yours in the pursuit of justice. Breakfast, when it comes, is consumed while your mind runs through scenarios. How will you approach Yoshimura? Will you challenge him publicly, allowing him the chance to explain or apologize, giving him the opportunity to die with whatever honor remains to him? Or will you visit him privately, handling this as a personal matter between former friends, rather than a public spectacle that might destabilize the broader community? Each approach has its advantages and risks. Public confrontation demonstrates your commitment to honor and gives Yoshimura the chance to respond appropriately, but it also creates witnesses who might interfere or spread stories that could complicate matters for your family. Private confrontation allows for more control over the situation, but it also raises questions about whether you're acting from honor or from personal vengeance. The rice you eat while considering these options tastes like nothing at all. Your body is consuming fuel while your mind works through the complexities of revenge in a society where form matters as much as substance, or how you restore honor is almost as important as whether you restore it. Training comes next, but today, it's different from your usual morning practice. Instead of running through kata, designed to maintain general fitness and technical proficiency, you're practicing specific techniques that might be useful in combat against someone who knows your usual fighting style. Yoshimura has watched you train for years. He knows your preferred combinations, your habitual responses to various attacks, your physical limitations and strengths. This means you need to surprise him, to fight in ways he hasn't seen, to become unpredictable enough to overcome his advanced knowledge of your capabilities. The dojo that usually echoes with the sound of familiar forms now rings with experimentation as you explore techniques you've studied but rarely used. Combinations that feel awkward because they're outside your normal repertoire, footwork patterns that might confuse an opponent who expects you to move in more familiar ways. Your training dummy, a thick post wrapped in straw and rope, bears the brunt of your experimental violence. Each strike is delivered with a kind of focused intention that transforms practice into prayer. And by the time you're finished, your arms ache with the pleasant burn that comes from muscles worked to their limits. But more importantly, your mind is clear about what your body can do when called upon to transform meditation into murder. Surveillance becomes the next part of your routine, though it's disguised as normal activities. Walking through your compound to inspect the guards, visiting the stables to check on your horses, examining the walls and gates to ensure they're properly maintained. All of these routine tasks now serve the additional purpose of observing who comes and goes, who might be carrying messages, who seems nervous or guilty or otherwise suspicious, because Yoshimura's betrayal raises questions about everyone else in your circle. If he could be bought, who else might be negotiating their own price? If he could lie so convincingly for so long, who else might be wearing masks of loyalty while planning their own treachery? The paranoia that follows betrayal isn't irrational. It's a survival mechanism, a recognition that your ability to judge character has been proven fatally flawed. Every servant who approaches you gets scrutinized. Every message that arrives gets examined for hidden meanings. Every ally who sends greetings gets evaluated for signs of nervousness or guilt. The world has become a puzzle in which everyone might be playing a role, and you're the detective trying to solve it before it kills you. This constant vigilance is exhausting, but it's also clarifying. When you can't trust anyone completely, you learn to rely on your own judgment, your own skills, your own preparation. The isolation that comes with betrayal forces you to become more self-sufficient, more dangerous, more capable of acting alone when action becomes necessary. The afternoon brings letter writing, but not the usual correspondence about business matters, political developments, or family news. Today you're writing what might be your final letters, messages to be delivered only if you don't survive your confrontation with Yoshimura, instructions for your family about how to handle various obligations, advice for your son about navigating a world where honor and survival sometimes conflict. These letters are harder to write than you expected because they force you to confront the possibility that your quest for justice might end with your own death. Yoshimura might be a better fighter than you remember. He might have allies you don't know about. He might be prepared for your revenge in ways that give him advantages you haven't anticipated. But the possibility of death doesn't change the necessity of action. If anything, it clarifies your priorities. Honor isn't just about living well, it's about dying well when life becomes incompatible with principle. And if your confrontation with Yoshimura results in your death, at least it will be a death that serves meaning rather than one that simply happens. Evening brings the final ritual of the day, preparing your armor and weapons for immediate use. Every piece of equipment gets one final inspection, every strap gets tested for security, every blade gets one last touch of oil and blessing. By the time you're finished, your gear is arranged so that you can arm yourself completely in darkness, by touch alone, without wasting precious seconds fumbling for straps or weapons if you're awakened by emergency. This preparation isn't paranoia, it's professionalism. Warriors who survive long enough to become veterans learn that the difference between life and death often comes down to seconds saved in preparation. Advantages gained through obsessive attention to details that seem minor until they become critical. The last thing you do before attempting sleep is stand in your garden, looking up at stars that have watched over countless samurai facing similar decisions throughout history. The same constellations that guided your ancestors through their own crises of honor and betrayal now offer whatever wisdom celestial bodies can provide to mortals struggling with terrestrial problems. The stars don't offer answers, but they offer perspective. Your personal crisis, devastating as it feels, is part of a pattern that has repeated itself throughout human history. Other men have been betrayed by friends. Other warriors have faced choices between vengeance and forgiveness. Other families have survived the kind of upheaval that you're experiencing now. This doesn't make your pain less real, but it does make it less unique, less personally targeted by malicious fate. You're not the victim of some cosmic conspiracy, you're simply the latest participant in the eternal human drama of loyalty and betrayal, honor and survival, love and violence. Still think planning revenge was just about sharpening swords? This was just one day of preparation. The real weapon you were forging was your own transformation from victim to instrument of justice. Katakuchi, the right of legal revenge, isn't just permission to kill the person who wronged you. It's a sacred obligation that transforms personal injury into cosmic necessity, individual pain into universal justice, private anger into public duty. When Yoshimura betrayed your trust and sold your family's secrets, he didn't just commit a crime against you, he tore a hole in the fabric of reality itself, creating an imbalance that can only be corrected through the precise application of violence. This is the dark heart of Bushido, the aspect of the samurai code that modern people prefer to ignore when they romanticize warrior culture. For every story about noble sacrifice and beautiful death, there are 10 stories about revenge that consumed entire families, vendettas that lasted for generations, honor killings that escalated into full-scale wars because someone's great-grandfather insulted someone else's great-grandfather's horse. The code doesn't just permit revenge, it demands it. A samurai who fails to seek appropriate vengeance for significant betrayal becomes complicit in that betrayal, his own honor questionable, his family name stained by the implication that their injuries weren't worth avenging. This isn't optional. This isn't a choice between forgiveness and violence. This is a mandatory response to cosmic disorder, as inevitable as sunrise, as necessary as breathing. But revenge, in samurai society, must follow rules that are more complex than simple murder. The vengeance must be proportional to the offense, appropriate to the social status of both parties. conducted in ways that preserve honor rather than destroying it, and executed with a kind of precision that demonstrates mastery rather than mere anger. This creates a philosophical paradox that has driven countless samurai to madness, suicide, or both. The code that makes revenge mandatory also makes it nearly impossible to execute perfectly. Every potential response carries its own moral hazards, its own possibilities for dishonor, its own ways of creating new problems while solving old ones. Consider your options in dealing with Yoshimura's betrayal. Direct confrontation challenging. Him to single combat is the most honorable approach, but it assumes he'll accept the challenge and fight fairly. If he refuses, you're left with the choice between letting the betrayal stand, dishonor through inaction, or forcing a fight that he didn't choose, dishonor through coercion. If he accepts but cheats, you might win the battle while losing the moral high ground. If he accepts and fights honorably but defeats you, your family loses both their protector and their chance for justice. The historical precedent most relevant to your situation is the story of the Soga brothers, who spent 18 years planning revenge against the man who killed their father. Their dedication to the cause became legendary, but their methods infiltrating their target's household, waiting for the perfect moment, striking during a moment of celebration raised questions about whether their patience enhanced their honor or corrupted it. Some argued that their willingness to wait so long demonstrated perfect self-control and strategic thinking. Others suggested that 18 years of planning revenge turned them into something other than samurai assassins obsessed with a single target, incapable of moving beyond their pain, more devoted to their dead father than to their living obligations. Don't have 18 years to plan. Yoshimura's betrayal has set events in motion that require immediate response. The Taira forces that now know your secrets won't wait for you to perfect your revenge strategy. Your son, whose location Yoshimura revealed, needs protection now. Your allies, who might be targeted based on information Yoshimura provided, deserve warning immediately. This urgency creates its own moral complications. Perfect revenge requires perfect preparation, but immediate necessity demands imperfect action. Do you choose honor over effectiveness or effectiveness over honor? Do you risk your family's survival for the sake of following proper protocols? Or do you abandon protocols to ensure your family's survival? The code provides guidance, but it's guidance written by men who had the luxury of contemplating these questions in peaceful times, not by warriors facing immediate threats from enemies who already possess their most sensitive secrets. Assassination killing. Yoshimura through stealth rather than open combat is more practical but less honorable. It removes the risk of defeat in fair fight, but it also transforms you from a warrior into a murderer, from someone seeking justice into someone pursuing vengeance through methods that your ancestors might not approve. But the distinction between assassination and warfare isn't always clear in samurai society. The ninja who serve various clans are technically samurai, trained in the same codes and loyal to the same principles, but they pursue honor through stealth rather than open combat. Their methods are different, but their motivations are identical. Service to Lord, protection of family, preservation of honor through the elimination of threats. The question becomes whether Yoshimura's betrayal has made him enough of a threat to justify methods that would be dishonorable if used against an honorable opponent. Has his treachery placed him outside the protection of the codes that govern combat between samurai? Does betrayal itself constitute a form of dishonorable combat that justifies dishonorable responses? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're practical decisions that will determine not just whether you live or die, but whether you live or die as a person your ancestors can acknowledge in the afterlife. Political destruction using your influence and connections to destroy Yoshimura's reputation. livelihood, and social standing is the subtlest form of revenge. But it's also the most dependent on systems that Yoshimura's betrayal has called into question. How do you know which of your allies can be trusted to help with this kind of campaign? How do you know that the people you're asking for assistance aren't already secretly aligned with your enemies? Political revenge also takes time, and time might be a luxury you can't afford. While you're carefully orchestrating Yoshimura's social destruction, he might be providing additional intelligence to your enemies, deepening their advantages, making their eventual victory more certain. But there's something appealing about the idea of destroying Yoshimura through the same social mechanisms that made his betrayal possible. If he sold your trust for gold and political advantage, there's poetic justice in using gold and political advantage to destroy him in return. The most extreme option, seppuku, performed in a way that makes Yoshimura responsible for your death, would preserve your honor while condemning him to live with the knowledge that his betrayal drove an honorable man to suicide. This is perhaps the most devastating form of revenge available to a samurai, making your enemy responsible for your death, without giving him the satisfaction of killing you directly. Ritual suicide, as revenge has powerful precedent in samurai history. Warriors who couldn't obtain direct vengeance sometimes chose to die in ways that made their enemies' guilt publicly obvious, turning their death into a form of moral weapon that continued fighting long after their bodies stopped breathing. But seppuku as revenge is also the ultimate admission of defeat. It acknowledges that you can't solve your problems through skill, courage, or intelligence, that the only victory available to you is the Pyrrhic victory of making your enemy feel guilty about your death. And it abandons your family to face the consequences of Yoshimura's betrayal without your protection, which might be the ultimate dishonor, prioritizing your personal reputation over your obligations to the living people who depend on you. The Code of Vengeance also includes provisions for inherited revenge situations where the obligation to seek justice passes from father to son, brother to brother, generation to generation until someone finally succeeds in restoring balance or dies in the attempt. This is how personal betrayals become family curses, how individual injuries become generational obsessions. If you die in your attempt to correct Yoshimura's betrayal, your son will inherit the obligation to complete what you started. If he fails, the responsibility will pass to his son, and so on, until either justice is achieved or your family line ends in the pursuit of it. This creates a terrible form of immortality for both victim and perpetrator. Neither family can move beyond the original injury until it's been properly addressed. And properly addressed is defined by standards, so exacting that success becomes almost impossible while failure becomes hereditary. The most famous example of inherited revenge is the story of the 47 Ronin, masterless samurai who spent 2 years planning the assassination of the court official who had forced their lord to commit seppuku. Their success made them legends, but their methods, infiltration, deception, careful planning followed by coordinated assault raised questions about whether they were heroes or terrorists, whether their loyalty was admirable or obsessive. More importantly, their story demonstrates how revenge can become larger than the people pursuing it. By the time they finally struck, their motivation had evolved beyond simple justice for their dead lord into something more complex, a demonstration that samurai values still mattered in a world that seemed increasingly willing to abandon them. For practical considerations, your situation with Yoshimura might be heading in the same direction. What began as personal betrayal between friends is becoming symbolic of larger questions about loyalty, honor, and survival in a world where war makes traditional values difficult to maintain. The pressure you feel to respond appropriately isn't just personal, it's cultural. Other samurai are watching to see how you handle this betrayal, because your response will help define what honor means in these chaotic times. If you let Yoshimura's treachery stand without appropriate consequence, you're sending a message that friendship means nothing, that oaths can be broken without penalty, that betrayal is an acceptable tool for advancement. But if you respond with disproportionate violence, or if you handle the situation in ways that create more chaos than justice, you're sending an equally dangerous message, that honor is just another word for revenge, that samurai are indistinguishable from bandits, that the codes that govern warrior society are just elaborate justifications for brutality. This is the burden of being samurai in times of crisis. Your personal choices become public statements about what your entire class stands for. And the stakes are measured not just in individual lives, but in the survival of the values that make civilization possible. Still think the samurai code was about noble sacrifice and beautiful death? This was just the theory. The practice was much more complicated, much more dangerous, and much more likely to destroy everyone involved. The techniques available to a samurai seeking to correct betrayal aren't just different approaches to the same goal. They're entirely different philosophies of justice made manifest through violence, each one carrying its own moral implications, practical advantages, and spiritual consequences that will follow you into whatever afterlife awaits warriors who kill in the name of honor. Direct confrontation represents the purest expression of samurai values. Face your enemy openly. State your grievance clearly. Give him the opportunity to respond honorably, and then settle the matter through skill at arms with heaven itself serving as judge. This is the method that poets celebrate, that children learn about in stories, that makes samurai culture seem noble and romantic to people who have never had to actually implement it. The reality is more complex and considerably more dangerous. When you arrive at Yoshimura's compound in full armor, accompanied by a single witness whose role is to verify that you followed proper protocols, you're not just challenging one man to combat, you're putting your entire family's future at risk on the outcome of a single fight. If you lose, your betrayer lives on in prosperity while your family inherits your shame along with your debts. If you win but handle the challenge improperly, you might be branded a murderer despite your technically legal victory. The formal challenge itself follows scripts that have been refined over centuries. You must state your grievance clearly and, specifically, provide evidence of the betrayal, offer your opponent the chance to explain or apologize, and only then propose combat as the method of resolution. Each step must be performed with perfect courtesy, because anything less than perfect form can be used to question the legitimacy of your entire case. Yoshimura-san, you might say, standing in his courtyard while snow falls around you like prayers made visible. You shared sake with me under cherry blossoms and swore brotherhood that would last beyond death. You held my firstborn son and declared him strong like his father. You accepted the responsibility for protecting my family's secrets as if they were your own. Yesterday, I received a letter in your hand acknowledging that you have sold those secrets to our enemies for gold. I have brought witnesses and evidence. Do you deny this betrayal, or will you face the consequences with whatever honor remains to you? His response will determine everything that follows. If he denies the betrayal despite the evidence, you're within your rights to call him a liar and demand immediatus et factium. The formal language strips away all pretense, all possibility of misunderstanding. This is the moment when friendship dies and only honor remains. If he accepts your challenge, you both know that one of you will not see tomorrow's sunrise. The combat itself follows ancient protocols. You fight with katana. The battle continues until one participant can no longer continue, and witnesses record every detail for posterity. There's something almost religious about the precision of it all, the bowing, the positioning, The moment when steel whispers from scabbards like prayers being answered. But here's what the stories don't tell. Most betrayers don't respond with honor. They laugh. They call for their guards. They remind you that you're outnumbered 50-1 and that your formal challenge means nothing when arrows are already nocked and aimed at your heart. This is when you discover that betrayal isn't just a single act. It's a philosophy, a way of seeing the world where honor is a weakness to be exploited rather than a strength to be respected. Your betrayer has already abandoned the very code that gives your challenge meaning. Why would he suddenly embrace it now when doing so means probable death? So you stand there in the snow, your witness beside you, surrounded by armed men who owe their loyalty to gold rather than honor, and you realize that your perfect adherence to protocol has walked you directly into a trap. The betrayal wasn't just selling your secrets, it was luring you here, to this moment where your honor becomes the weapon used against you. This is why direct confrontation, despite its moral purity, often proves tactically suicidal. You can be perfectly right and perfectly dead at the same time. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that your betrayer still retains enough honor to accept your challenge. The actual combat is nothing like the choreographed duels you see in paintings. Two men trying to kill each other with razor-sharp steel is brutal, exhausting, and usually over in minutes. You're fighting in winter, which means your hands are cold, your movements stiff, your breath creating fog that obscures your vision at critical moments. The katana in your hands weighs nearly 3 pounds, and after the first few exchanges, your arms feel like they're made of stone. Your betrayer is skilled. He wouldn't have survived this long without being skilled, and he's fighting for his life, just as desperately as you are. Every cut he makes opens new possibilities for your death. Every cut you make draws you closer to either victory or the moment when your strength fails and his blade finds your heart. If you win, it's probably because you wanted it more. Betrayers, despite their many talents, rarely possess the single-minded focus that comes from righteous fury. They're calculating even as they fight, looking for escape routes, wondering if they can talk their way out of this, hoping their guards will intervene despite the formal nature of the combat. You, on the other hand, have already accepted death as a possibility. This makes you dangerous in ways that mere skill cannot match. When your blade opens his throat and he falls bleeding into the snow, you don't feel triumph, you feel empty. The betrayal is answered, but the friendship is still dead. The trust still broken. The world still a place where the people you love most can destroy you most completely. Killing him doesn't resurrect the man you thought he was. It just adds another ghost to the collection that already haunts your dreams. But perhaps you're wiser than the poets would prefer. Perhaps you understand that honor isn't always best served by giving your enemies fair warning and equal opportunity to kill you. This is where we enter the murkier waters of calculated assassination, the art of killing with precision, patience, and absolute secrecy. The samurai class has always maintained a complicated relationship with stealth and subterfuge. Officially, such methods are beneath the notice of honorable warriors. Unofficially, every successful samurai family has employed them when circumstances demanded. The key is understanding when those circumstances arise and how to implement them. Without staining your soul beyond redemption, assassination requires a different kind of preparation than direct confrontation. Instead of polishing your armor and composing death poems, you begin studying your target's routines with the patience of a hunter tracking prey through winter forests. You learn when he rises, when he eats, when he visits his concubines, when he inspects his holdings. You map his compound, identify his guards, note which servants might be bought and which are loyal unto death. This takes months. Months of watching, listening, planning, while the knowledge of his betrayal burns in your chest like swallowed coals. Every day that passes without action feels like another small betrayal of your own honor. But patience is its own form of discipline. The assassin who acts too quickly usually dies badly. And dying badly means your betrayer outlives you to enjoy his prosperity. You begin making subtle inquiries about his household. A merchant friend happens to mention that Yoshimura's cook has gambling debts. A traveling entertainer notes that the guard at the eastern gate drinks too much sake. Information accumulates like snow, seemingly innocent individually but collectively building into something that can crush your enemy. The actual planning resembles a tea ceremony in its attention to detail and precision. You must account for every variable: weather, moon phase, the schedule of guard rotations, the likelihood of unexpected visitors. You study the architecture of his compound, noting which rooms can be entered silently, which floors creak, which windows open onto gardens. Where a man might wait in darkness, you acquire poison. This requires delicate negotiations with individuals whose existence you'll never acknowledge, whose names you'll never speak aloud. The poison must be subtle enough to avoid immediate detection, but potent enough to ensure death. Too fast, and his food tasters will detect it. Too slow, and he might survive long enough to identify you as the source. The night you finally act, you dress in dark clothing without family crests, carry weapons that cannot be traced to your household, and move through the darkness like a fasa. Prayer whispered in an empty temple. Your heart pounds so hard you're certain the guards can hear it, but you've planned this approach for so long that your body follows the route automatically. Entering his compound requires skills that no samurai admits to possessing. You climb walls, slip through shadows, avoid the pools of lamplight where guards might glimpse your silhouette. Every sound seems amplified. The whisper of cloth against stone, the soft placement of each footstep, the controlled rhythm of your breathing. When you finally reach his sleeping chambers, he's alone except for a single concubine who sleeps so deeply that sake might not be the only substance she's consumed. You could kill him now with a blade across the throat, quick and certain, but that would leave evidence of violence. Instead, you approach with the vial of poison, a substance that will stop his heart in a way that resembles natural causes. As you lean over his sleeping form, you realize this is the moment that will define the rest of your life. If you pour the poison into his mouth, you become a different kind of person than you were when you entered this room. Not worse, necessarily, but different. The man who kills from shadows carries those shadows with him forever, but perhaps that's acceptable. Perhaps honor is complex enough to accommodate necessary darkness. You think of your family's secrets being sold, of the trust that was broken, of all the other innocents who might suffer if this betrayer continues to prosper. Sometimes protecting the light requires embracing darkness. The poison tastes like bitter almonds, or so you've been told. He never wakes up. By morning, his household will discover him dead in his bed, apparently claimed by a weak heart or a stroke. The concubine will swear he was fine when they retired, and the household physician will find no obvious signs of violence. You're already miles away by then, having slipped out the same way you entered, leaving no trace except a dead betrayer, and a mystery that will never be solved. The perfect assassination looks like natural death, and natural death generates no investigations, no demands for justice, no cycles of revenge that might destroy your own family. But you know. You carry the knowledge like a stone in your chest, heavier than any armor you've ever worn. You've answered betrayal with betrayal, stealth with stealth, dishonor with dishonor. The balance is restored, but the restoration required you to become something you never intended to be. Sometimes the most effective revenge involves never drawing your sword at all. Sometimes the betrayer's destruction comes not from poison or steel, but from the careful manipulation of the same social networks he used to betray you. This is warfare. By other means, requiring patience, subtlety, and a deep understanding of how power actually flows through the rigid hierarchies of samurai society. Political maneuvering begins with mapping relationships. Your betrayer exists within a web of obligations, debts, alliances, and dependencies that took decades to construct. Your task is to identify the critical connections, the ones that, if severed or corrupted, will cause his entire network to collapse like a building with its foundation stones removed. You begin by making casual inquiries about his various business relationships. Who provides his rice? Who buys his surplus? Which moneylenders hold his debts? Which other samurai families are allied with his through marriage or mutual obligation? Every relationship represents a potential pressure point, a place where carefully applied force might create the fractures that will eventually destroy him. The approach requires you to become something of an actor, playing the role of a concerned friend seeking to understand how such a trusted ally could have fallen so far. You express shock at his betrayal, disappointment at your own inability to see the signs, genuine worry about what this means for the stability of your social circle. People love to share information with someone who appears to be processing grief and confusion. Gradually, a picture emerges of a man whose prosperity rests on foundations less solid than they appear. His rice lands are mortgaged to pay for his concubines. His son's education is funded by loans from merchants who charge interest rates that would make a temple monk weep. His alliance with the regional daimyo depends on his ability to provide military service with equipment he can barely afford. Most interestingly, you discover that your betrayer has been selling information to multiple parties, not just the enemies. Who bought your secrets? He's been playing a complex game, balancing competing interests, using each group's secrets to maintain his position with the others. This makes him valuable to everyone and trusted by no one, a precarious position that might be exploited by someone with sufficient patience and skill. Your strategy unfolds over months, implemented through seemingly innocent actions that appear to have nothing to do with revenge. You mention to a mutual friend that you're concerned about Yoshimura's financial situation, having noticed he's been forced to sell some of his family's ancestral swords. The friend, being a friend, passes this concern along to others, adding his own observations and speculations. You arrange for one of your allies to default on a loan, creating a financial crisis that forces Yoshimura to call in debts from people who assumed they could repay at their leisure. Suddenly, several of his business relationships become strained as partners scramble to find resources they don't have. Through intermediaries, you begin spreading carefully selected truths about his various information-selling activities. Not accusations, those would require proof and formal proceedings. Just observations, concerns, questions about whether someone so willing to share secrets might have shared other secrets as well. The beauty of this approach is that you're not doing anything technically dishonorable. You're not lying, not making false accusations, not violating any codes of conduct. You're simply allowing the truth to circulate more freely than your betrayer might prefer. Truth, it turns out, can be as destructive as any poison when applied. With sufficient precision. As his network begins to fracture, Yoshimura finds himself increasingly isolated. The information he used to sell becomes less valuable because people no longer trust him with their secrets. The financial pressures mount as his creditors demand payment and his debtors prove unable to provide it. His political position weakens. As allies distance themselves from someone who appears to be facing serious difficulties, the final blow comes when you arrange for his most damaging secret to be revealed through channels that cannot be traced back to you. It turns out that Yoshimura has been embezzling funds from the temple where his ancestors are buried, using money intended for ancestral offerings to pay for his personal expenses. This isn't just betrayal, it's sacrilege, a violation so profound that it threatens his family's spiritual welfare across generations. When the revelation becomes public, his remaining allies abandon him immediately. No one can afford to be associated with someone who steals from the dead. His creditors call in their loans simultaneously, knowing that his disgrace makes him a poor risk for future repayment. His political position evaporates as his superiors distance themselves from a subordinate who has become a liability. Within 6 months of your betrayal being discovered, Yoshimura is ruined. Not dead, that would be too merciful, but stripped of everything that made his life worth living. His lands are sold to pay his debts. His family name is stained with shame that will persist for generations. His children face a future where their father's disgrace limits their own opportunities for advancement or advantageous marriage. You, meanwhile, have maintained your reputation as an honorable samurai who responded to betrayal with admirable restraint. No one can prove you orchestrated his downfall, though some might suspect. The suspicion actually enhances your reputation. It suggests you're someone who can protect himself and his interests without resorting to crude violence. But here's what you discover about political revenge. It's never quite as satisfying as you anticipated. Watching your enemy's slow destruction feels different from the clean finality of a blade across the throat. There's something almost cruel about this approach, a coldness that leaves you wondering if you've preserved your honor, or simply found a more sophisticated way to stain it. There exists another path, one that most samurai prefer not to discuss in polite company, but which remains available to those whose betrayal cuts deep, enough to justify supernatural intervention. This is the realm of spiritual warfare, where revenge transcends the physical world and enters territories where ancestors, spirits, and gods themselves might be enlisted in the pursuit of justice. The foundation of spiritual warfare lies in understanding that betrayal isn't just a violation of social contracts, it's a disruption of cosmic order, a tear in the fabric of reality that creates opportunities for forces beyond the material world to intervene. When someone violates sacred oaths, they open themselves to spiritual consequences that no amount of gold or political maneuvering can deflect. Your preparation begins with ritual purification, not because you're planning to pray for your enemies' destruction, but because you're preparing to work with energies that require absolute spiritual cleanliness to approach safely. You fast for days, consuming only water and rice, allowing your body to become a vessel capable of channeling forces that might otherwise consume you. The actual rituals vary depending on which spiritual traditions you've studied and which entities you're prepared to invoke. Some samurai work with Buddhist concepts of karma, performing elaborate ceremonies designed to accelerate the natural consequences of their betrayer's actions. Others draw on Shinto traditions, appealing to kami who protect sacred oaths and punish those who violate them. The most dangerous practitioners delve into older traditions, working with spirits and entities that predate organized religion, forces that care nothing for human morality but can be bargained with if you're willing to pay the appropriate price. These rituals require you to venture into sacred groves at midnight, to draw symbols in your own blood, to speak words that feel like they're burning your throat as you pronounce them. You might spend weeks crafting a curse doll, a physical representation of your betrayer constructed from materials that carry spiritual significance. Earth from his family's ancestral grave, cloth from garments he's worn, hair obtained through careful planning and considerable risk. The doll becomes a sympathetic link, a spiritual bridge that connects your will to his fate across whatever distances separate you. The moment of actually casting the curse feels like standing at the edge of an abyss and choosing to jump. You speak his name into darkness, list his crimes against the listening silence, and formally request that cosmic justice be accelerated beyond its normal timeline. The words seem to take on weight as you speak them, becoming more real than the physical world around you. Sometimes, the universe responds immediately. Within days of your ritual, your betrayer suffers a series of inexplicable misfortunes. His horse throws him for no apparent reason, breaking his leg in 3 places. A fire of unknown origin destroys his rice stores. His eldest son develops a wasting illness that no physician can diagnose or treat. Coincidences pile upon coincidences until even the most rational observers begin to suspect supernatural intervention. Other times, the response is more subtle. Your betrayer's luck gradually turns sour in ways that can't be traced to any specific cause. Business deals that should succeed fail at the last moment due to unforeseen complications. Allies begin to distrust him for reasons they can't articulate. He starts waking in the middle of the night, convinced that someone is watching him, though his guards report no intruders. The most disturbing cases involve psychological deterioration. Your betrayer begins seeing things that aren't there, shadows, moving when no one casts them, voices calling his name from empty rooms, faces in water that don't reflect his own features. He develops an obsession with checking locks, with looking over his shoulder, with maintaining lights throughout the night to keep unspecified darkness at bay. But spiritual warfare carries its own risks. The forces you invoke to destroy your enemy don't necessarily distinguish between righteous and unrighteous requests. They respond to will, to power, to the strength of your spiritual connection, but they don't care about human concepts of justice. If your own spiritual defenses are inadequate, the energies you've called forth might turn on you instead. You might find yourself experiencing the same misfortunes you've called down upon your betrayer. Your sleep becomes disturbed by nightmares that feel more real than waking life. Your health deteriorates in ways that physicians attribute to stress, but which you know have deeper origins. Your family begins to suffer mysterious accidents and illnesses that create a pattern of misfortune too consistent to be coincidental. The most dangerous consequence is spiritual contamination. Working with dark forces, even for righteous purposes, leaves marks on your soul that persist beyond the completion of your revenge. You become more sensitive to supernatural influences, more aware of the spiritual dimensions of reality, more isolated from people who exist purely in the material world. Years later, even if your revenge succeeds completely, you might find yourself unable to return to the simple faith in order and justice that once sustained you. You've seen behind the curtain of reality, witnessed the forces that operate beyond human comprehension, and that knowledge changes you in ways that can't be undone. Some samurai who pursue spiritual warfare eventually retreat from the world entirely, becoming monks or hermits, seeking purification from the spiritual contamination they've accepted in exchange for revenge. Others embrace their new nature, becoming spiritual warriors who specialize in supernatural conflicts, serving as intermediaries between the human world and the forces that exist beyond it. The question you must answer before beginning spiritual warfare is simple. Is your need for revenge worth the price of your spiritual innocence? Because once you've called upon powers beyond the physical world, you can never return to being someone who doesn't know such powers exist. Sleep becomes your enemy, not because you're not tired. The emotional exhaustion of betrayal is unlike anything else, a weariness that penetrates to your bones and makes every movement feel like you're moving through water. But your mind refuses to surrender consciousness, refuses to accept the vulnerability that sleep represents. You lie on your futon, listening to every sound in the compound. The whisper of wind through bamboo might be an assassin moving through the garden. The creak of settling wood might be someone testing the floorboards to find the spots that don't announce their presence. That distant sound, is it a night bird or someone signaling to Confederates hidden in the darkness beyond your walls? Your hand finds the grip of the wakizashi beside your sleeping place, and you realize you've been checking its position every few minutes since you lay down. The blade is sharp enough to cut moonbeams, perfectly maintained, ready for use at an instant's notice. But its presence doesn't provide the comfort it once did. If your closest friend could betray you, how do you know your own servants are loyal? How do you know the guards you trust with your life aren't already bought by enemies you haven't yet identified? The worst part isn't the fear, it's the rationality of the fear. Your paranoia isn't a psychological disorder. It's an accurate assessment of your situation. You've been betrayed once, which means your judgment of human character is demonstrably flawed. Anyone you trust might be another mistake waiting to unfold. Anyone who approaches you with friendship might be implementing a strategy that requires months or years to complete. This is how betrayal transforms you into a different person. Not immediately, not in some dramatic moment of revelation, but gradually, through hundreds of sleepless nights when your mind refuses to accept the peace that sleep represents. You become someone who checks locks twice, who varies his daily routines to avoid predictability, who interprets kindness as potential manipulation and generosity as possible espionage. The irony is that your increased vigilance, born from one experience of betrayal, makes you less trustworthy to others. People notice when you start keeping secrets, when you stop sharing confidences, when you begin treating friendship as a potential security risk. Your defense against betrayal begins to look like preparation for betrayal, and the people who might genuinely care about you start to wonder if they should trust you with their own secrets. You find yourself analyzing conversations days later, searching for hidden meanings, alternative interpretations, signs that the person speaking to you had motives beyond the obvious ones. Did your cousin really visit to maintain family relationships, or was he gathering information about your financial situation? Did the merchant really offer you better terms out of respect for your family, or is he trying to create a relationship that could be exploited later? Eventually, you realize that the betrayal has succeeded in ways your betrayer probably never intended. Even if you destroy him completely, even if you restore your honor and secure your family's position, you can never return to being someone who trusts easily. The knowledge that people can wear masks so convincing that you accept them as true faces, that knowledge becomes part of your permanent mental landscape. Since you can no longer rely on intuition or emotional connection to identify trustworthy people, you begin developing more systematic approaches to testing loyalty. This becomes a science, a craft, a necessary skill for survival in a world where anyone might be your enemy. The simplest tests involve sharing false information and seeing where it surfaces. You tell different people different versions of the same story, each version containing unique details that would identify the source if the story is repeated elsewhere. It's like planting colored dye in different streams to see which one leads to the river you're trying to trace. For instance, you might tell your chief retainer that you're considering investing in silk production, your stable master that you're thinking about breeding horses, and your cook that you're planning to expand your rice cultivation. If any of these false plans reach the ears of people who shouldn't know about them, you've identified at least one person whose loyalty is questionable. More sophisticated tests involve creating opportunities for betrayal and seeing who takes them. You might deliberately leave documents where they can be read by people who shouldn't have access to them, then wait to see if the information appears in places it shouldn't. You arrange situations where trusted servants could steal small amounts of money without detection, not because you care about the money, but because you need to know who can be trusted with larger temptations. The psychological complexity of these tests begins to consume enormous amounts of your mental energy. You're not just living your life, you're constantly running experiments, analyzing results, updating your assessments of the people around you. Every interaction becomes data to be processed, every gesture a potential indicator of hidden motives. You develop a mental filing system for categorizing people. Definitely loyal, probably loyal, uncertain, probably disloyal, definitely disloyal. But the categories keep shifting as new information emerges, and you realize that even your system for testing loyalty might be compromised. If the wrong people understand what you're doing, the most disturbing discovery is that some people fail. Your tests not because they're inherently disloyal, but because your testing creates the conditions for disloyalty. When you treat someone as potentially untrustworthy, they begin to feel unvalued, unappreciated, alienated from the household they've served faithfully for years. Eventually, they might become actually disloyal, not because they were always inclined toward betrayal, but because your defensive measures convinced them that their loyalty was neither recognized nor reciprocated. This creates a terrible feedback loop. Your fear of betrayal leads you to treat loyal people as potential betrayers, which damages their loyalty, which confirms your suspicion that trust is dangerous, which leads you to treat even more people as potential threats. The betrayal that happened to you begins to spread like a spiritual infection, corrupting relationships that might otherwise have remained healthy. You start to wonder if this is what your original betrayer experienced, if his betrayal of you was itself a response to someone else's betrayal of him. Perhaps the cycle extends back through generations, each betrayal creating the conditions for the next one, like a curse that passes from victim to victim without ever being broken. The most successful samurai families, you realize, are those that have found ways to break this cycle. They've developed institutional methods for maintaining loyalty that don't depend on constant testing and suspicion. They create reward systems that make loyalty more profitable than betrayal, punishment systems that make betrayal genuinely dangerous, and cultural systems that make loyalty a source of personal pride rather than just professional obligation. But implementing such systems requires you to trust people enough to delegate authority to them, and trust is precisely what betrayal has taught you is dangerous. You're trapped in a position where you need to solve a problem that requires the very thing the problem has taken away from you. What you discover, living in the aftermath of serious betrayal, is that trust isn't just an emotion or a decision. It's a fundamental orientation toward reality that shapes how you interpret everything you experience. When betrayal damages your capacity for trust, it doesn't just change your relationships with other people. It changes your relationship with existence itself. Before the betrayal, you moved through the world with a basic assumption that things were generally as they appeared to be. When people expressed friendship, you assumed they felt friendly. When they made promises, you assumed they intended to keep them. When they shared secrets, you assumed they valued the relationship enough to protect those secrets. This assumption of basic honesty wasn't naivety. It was the foundation that made complex social relationships possible. After betrayal, you discover that appearance and reality can diverge so completely that they become almost unrelated. The person who betrayed you had seemed completely trustworthy right up until the moment you discovered his betrayal. Every gesture of friendship, every expression of loyalty, every moment of apparent sincerity had been either a lie or a performance, designed to maintain his access to information he could sell. This realization forces you to reconsider everything you thought you knew about reading people. Were there signs you missed? Subtle indicators that might have warned you if you'd been more observant? Or was his deception so complete that no amount of vigilance could have penetrated it? The answer, you eventually realize, is that perfect deception is possible, and this knowledge changes you in ways that go far beyond your relationships with other people. If you can't trust your ability to distinguish between genuine and false friendship, how can you trust your ability to make any judgments about human nature? If your instincts about people are so fundamentally flawed, what other judgments might be equally unreliable? You begin to question decisions you made years ago, wondering if the people you trusted then were actually trustworthy, or if you were simply lucky that they chose not to betray you. You start to wonder if the loyalty you've received from others is genuine or strategic, if the affection people express toward you is real or calculated to achieve goals you haven't identified. This isn't just paranoia, it's a rational response to discovering that your previous method of evaluating trustworthiness was demonstrably inadequate. But the rational response to inadequate judgment isn't necessarily better judgment. Sometimes it's the abandonment of judgment altogether. The decision to assume the worst about everyone because assuming the best has proven dangerous. The corruption spreads beyond your assessment of other people. If you can't trust your judgment about human nature, can you trust your judgment about anything else? Your strategic decisions, your financial choices, your evaluation of political situations, all of these depend on your ability to read people accurately, to understand their motivations, to predict their likely actions. If that ability is compromised, every decision becomes questionable. Some samurai respond to this crisis by becoming more religious, seeking spiritual guidance for decisions they no longer trust themselves to make. Others become more systematic, developing elaborate protocols for every significant choice, hoping that rigid adherence to proven procedures can substitute for the intuitive judgment that betrayal has damaged. The most unfortunate become paralyzed, unable to make any significant decisions because they've lost confidence in their ability to evaluate the consequences. They retreat from positions of responsibility, decline opportunities for advancement, avoid relationships that might require trust, gradually withdrawing from the world to minimize their exposure to future betrayal. But withdrawal brings its own problems. A samurai who can't trust others can't lead effectively, can't form the alliances necessary for political success, can't even maintain the household relationships that provide the foundation for family prosperity. The betrayal that was meant to destroy your external position ends up destroying your internal capacity to function in the role that defines your identity. The most disturbing transformation occurs when you realize that your response to betrayal has begun to make you more like the person who betrayed you. The vigilance necessary to protect yourself from future betrayal requires you to develop skills that are fundamentally duplicitous. You learn to hide your thoughts, to present false information, to manipulate others' perceptions of your intentions. In other words, you learn to do exactly what your betrayer did to you. The process begins innocently enough. You start being more careful about what information you share and with whom you share it. You begin presenting different versions of yourself to different people, showing each person only the aspects of your personality and situation that you want them to see. You develop cover stories for your activities, plausible explanations for your movements that might conceal your real purposes. These are defensive measures you tell yourself. You're not trying to harm anyone, you're just trying to protect yourself from people who might want to harm you. But the skills required for protection are identical to the skills required for predation. The ability to hide your true thoughts, to present false information convincingly, to manipulate others' perceptions. These capabilities don't distinguish between defensive and offensive applications. As your deceptive abilities improve, you begin to notice opportunities for using them proactively. Information that people share with you, thinking you're trustworthy, could be valuable to others. Positions of trust that people offer you could provide access to resources or intelligence that might be useful for your own purposes. The same skills you develop to avoid being exploited could be used to exploit others. The temptation is particularly strong when you identify people who remind you of your betrayer, individuals who seem to be playing multiple sides, sharing information. inappropriately, or using their relationships for personal gain. It would be justice, you rationalize, to give them a taste of their own medicine. It would be educational for them to experience betrayal from the receiving. When you finally cross that line, when you use information someone shared in confidence to advance your own interests at their expense, you discover that betrayal is easier the second time. The guilt and self-recrimination that you expected don't materialize with the intensity you anticipated. Instead, you feel a grim satisfaction, a sense that you've balanced the cosmic scales by ensuring that trusting people sometimes get hurt, just as suspicious people sometimes get betrayed. This is the moment when you realize you've become the thing you most despised. Not intentionally, not through any conscious decision to abandon your principles, but through the gradual accumulation of defensive measures that eventually became offensive capabilities. The person who betrayed you didn't just damage your ability to trust others, he damaged your ability to be trustworthy yourself. The worst part is that your new capabilities make you more effective in ways that are difficult to ignore. Your willingness to use deception strategically gives you advantages in negotiations, political maneuvering, and business relationships. People who maintain their naive honesty often seem foolish to you now, unnecessarily vulnerable to exploitation by others who lack such scruples. You begin to wonder if your original betrayer went through the same process. Perhaps he was once as trusting and honest as you used to be. Perhaps someone else's betrayal taught him the same lessons you've learned, forced him to develop the same protective capabilities, gradually transformed him into someone who could betray a friend without losing sleep over it. If so, then your betrayal of him, whether through direct confrontation, assassination, political maneuvering, or spiritual warfare, might simply be continuing this cycle. You might be creating the conditions that will eventually produce someone else's transformation into a betrayer, someone who will justify their actions by pointing to your betrayal of them as the lesson that taught them trust was dangerous. This realization doesn't make you want to abandon your pursuit of justice. If anything, it makes you more determined to ensure that your betrayer faces consequences severe enough to discourage others from following his example. But it does make you aware that the price of your revenge might be higher than you initially calculated. You might succeed in destroying your enemy, but only by becoming something that would have horrified the person you used to be. Every betrayal must eventually reach its conclusion, though the form that conclusion takes can vary dramatically depending on the choices made by both the betrayer and the betrayed. The resolution might come through violence, through justice, through forgiveness, or through the slow passage of time that makes old wounds irrelevant. But it will come because the human soul cannot sustain the tension of unresolved betrayal indefinitely without breaking. When the moment finally arrives, when all your planning, all your preparation, all your careful consideration of options and consequences leads to standing face to face with the person who destroyed your trust, you discover that nothing could have prepared you for the complexity of emotions that arise. He looks smaller than you remembered. Not physically, necessarily, but diminished in some essential way that makes you wonder how you ever found him impressive enough to trust. The aura of competence and reliability that once made him seem worthy of your confidence has evaporated, leaving behind someone who looks ordinary, even pathetic. You realize that much of his power over you came from your own projection, your own need to believe that someone so close to you was worthy of that closeness. "I knew you would come," he says, and there's something in his voice that might be relief. "I've been waiting." This isn't the defiance you expected, the arrogant assumption that he could escape consequences for his actions. Instead, he seems almost grateful that the waiting is over, that the inevitable confrontation has finally arrived. You wonder if the guilt has been eating at him the way the betrayal has been consuming you, if his nights have been as sleepless as yours, if he's been carrying the weight of what he did like a stone in his chest. Why? The question emerges before you can. Stop it. Though you'd plan more formal words, more ceremonial language appropriate to the gravity of the moment. But sometimes the heart speaks before the mind can impose its structures, and this single word carries all the pain, confusion, and desperate need for understanding that has driven you to this point. He looks away, unable to meet your eyes, and for a moment you see the friend you used to know struggling beneath the surface of the betrayer he became. "My daughter," he says finally. They had my daughter." The explanation hits you like a physical blow. Not because it justifies what he did, but because it makes it comprehensible in ways that pure greed or ambition never could. A father protecting his child, that's a motivation you can understand, even if you can't forgive the methods he chose. "You could have come to me," you say, though even as the words leave your mouth, you know how inadequate they sound. "We could have found another way. Could we?" His laugh is bitter hollow. They wanted your secrets specifically. They knew exactly what information would destroy your family's position, exactly which details would give them the leverage they needed against your allies. Coming to you would have just meant watching them kill my daughter before they moved. On to other methods of persuasion. You realize that your betrayal was never just about you. It was part of a larger strategy, a complex political maneuver designed to weaken multiple families simultaneously. Your betrayer was just one piece in a game whose scope you're only beginning to understand. This knowledge should make you angrier, but instead it makes you feel oddly hollow. The personal nature of the betrayal, the intimate wound of having your trust violated by someone close to you, diminishes when you discover it was just business, just strategy, just one move in someone else's campaign for power. Where is she? Now, you ask? Safe. Hidden where they can't find her, I hope. He meets your eyes again, and you see the desperation there, the constant fear that has been driving his actions. "I know what I did to you is unforgivable. I know the price that honor demands. But she's 8 years old, and she's never done anything to deserve death because of her father's enemies." This is the moment when you understand that there are no clean resolutions to some betrayals. You can kill him, and his daughter becomes an orphan who might grow up seeking revenge against you. You can spare him, and he remains a security risk, someone who has already proven willing to betray friends to protect family. You can try to help him protect his daughter, but that might make you complicit in the very betrayal that brought you. Here, the moral clarity you thought would come with confrontation refuses to materialize. Instead, you're faced with the recognition that sometimes honor conflicts with justice, justice conflicts with mercy, and mercy conflicts with practical necessity. Sometimes there are no good choices, only degrees of harm that must be weighed against each other. "If I had a daughter," you say slowly, "and someone threatened her life, what would I do?" The question hangs in the air between you, heavy with implications. You know the answer. You would do anything necessary to protect her, including betraying friends, abandoning honor, selling secrets to enemies. The knowledge that you would make the same choice he made doesn't excuse his betrayal, but it makes his humanity visible beneath his treachery. "I don't expect forgiveness," he says. "I don't deserve it. But if you're going to kill me, please, make it quick. And don't let them know where she is." The request transforms the moment from one of justice to one of mercy. He's not asking you to spare his life. He's asking you to spare his daughter's. The distinction is crucial because it means your response will define not just his fate, but your own character. The person you become in this moment is the person you'll carry with you for the rest of your life. Sometimes the confrontation ends not with your blade taking his life, but with his recognition that honor demands he take his own. Seppuku, the ritual suicide that allows a disgraced samurai to die with whatever dignity remains to him, represents both the ultimate acknowledgement of guilt and the final assertion of personal agency in the face of inevitable doom. When your betrayer kneels before you and requests permission to perform seppuku, the dynamic between you shifts dramatically. He's no longer your enemy seeking to escape consequences, but a fellow samurai, acknowledging that those consequences are just and accepting responsibility for actions that have brought shame upon his name and family. The ritual itself follows protocols that have been refined over centuries, each element designed to transform what could be mere suicide into an act of spiritual significance. He bathes carefully, purifying his body as preparation for the purification of his soul. He dresses in white robes that symbolize death and rebirth, the same color worn by corpses and by pilgrims beginning sacred journeys. He writes his death poem, the final expression of his thoughts and feelings before departing this world. These poems, traditionally only 31 syllables, must somehow capture the essence of a life ending, the acknowledgement of failure, and the hope for spiritual redemption despite temporal disgrace. The best death poems achieve a poetic economy that makes every word essential, every image weighted with meaning that extends beyond its literal content. His poem, when he shows it to you, is surprisingly moving. Cherry blossoms fall even from far from the strongest branch. My daughter will bloom. The verse acknowledges his own impending death while expressing hope that his sacrifice might somehow protect the child whose safety motivated his betrayal. It's not an excuse for what he did, but an explanation of what he hoped to accomplish, and a prayer that his death might restore the balance his life disrupted. The ceremony requires a witness, traditionally someone who respected the person committing seppuku before his disgrace. Your presence serves multiple purposes. You verify that the ritual was performed correctly. You ensure that he actually dies rather than simply injuring himself and surviving in shame. And you provide the compassionate blow that ends his suffering. If the disemboweling doesn't kill him quickly enough, as he kneels on the white cloth that will catch his blood, you see him not as the betrayer who sold your secrets, but as a man trying to transform his disgrace into something approaching nobility. The betrayal remains unforgivable, but the manner of his response to being confronted with it demonstrates that some part of his samurai soul survived the corruption that led to his treachery. He takes the wakizashi in both hands, its blade gleaming in the lamplight like captured moonbeams. The cut, when it comes, is deeper and more decisive than you expected. He draws the blade across his abdomen with the steady precision of someone who has accepted death completely, who welcomes it as the only possible resolution to an impossible situation. The pain must be extraordinary, but his expression remains controlled, focused, determined to complete the ritual properly despite the agony. Blood flows steadily onto the white cloth, dark and thick in the flickering light. His breathing becomes labored, but he maintains his kneeling position, refusing to collapse even as his strength drains away with his blood. When it becomes clear that he's suffering more than necessary, you step forward with your katana. The blow that takes his head is swift, clean, merciful, the final service one samurai can provide for another. His death is instant, transforming prolonged agony into immediate peace. In dying this way, he accomplishes something that mere execution could never achieve. He reclaims a portion of his honor through the manner of his death, demonstrates that his betrayal came from desperation rather than pure evil, and provides his family with a narrative that emphasizes his final acknowledgement of wrongdoing rather than the wrongdoing itself. But his death also accomplishes something for you. It provides closure in a way that simple revenge never could. You've witnessed his acknowledgement of guilt, his acceptance of responsibility, his willingness to pay the ultimate price for his actions. The betrayal is answered not just with punishment, but with justice that he himself recognized as appropriate. Yet even this resolution carries complexities that become apparent only later. His daughter, when she eventually learns of her father's death, will know that he died by seppuku but might not understand the betrayal that necessitated it. She might grow up believing that he was driven to death by cruel enemies rather than by the consequences of his own choices. His honorable death might plant the seeds of future vengeance based on incomplete understanding of the circumstances that led to it. Not every betrayal ends in death. Sometimes the resolution involves punishments that are arguably more severe than execution, exile from everything that gives life meaning, permanent shame that destroys not just the betrayer, but his entire family. Line, social death that leaves the body breathing but strips away everything that makes existence worthwhile. When the formal judgment comes down, when the authorities who have investigated your betrayer's actions decide that his crimes warrant exile rather than execution, you initially feel cheated. Death would have been cleaner, more final, more satisfying. Exile seems like he's getting away with something, escaping the ultimate consequences of his ultimate betrayal. You discover how wrong you are when you see him preparing to leave. Exile for a samurai means more than just geographical displacement. It means the complete severing of all social connections that define identity and purpose. His name is struck from family records as if he had never existed. His children are forbidden to acknowledge him as their father. His wife is encouraged to remarry as though she were a widow. His property is redistributed to relatives who inherit the obligation to pretend he never lived. He becomes a non-person, someone whose existence is acknowledged only to the extent necessary to maintain the punishment that denies his existence. When people speak of his family, they refer to his eldest son as the head of household, as if leadership had passed to the next generation through death rather than disgrace. His achievements are attributed to others or forgotten entirely. His failures become cautionary tales told without naming him as their source. The physical aspects of exile are almost secondary to the social erasure. Yes, he must leave his homeland, abandon his properties, seek survival in foreign territories where no one knows his history or his skills. But the deeper punishment is the knowledge that his entire life has been retroactively canceled, that the world has decided he never should have existed and is now acting as if he never did. You track his movements for a while, partly from curiosity, and partly from a lingering need to ensure that his punishment is real rather than theatrical. He travels from village to village, offering his services as a masterless samurai, but his skills are no longer valued in the same way. Without family connections, without an established reputation, without the social networks that give samurai their power, he's just another wandering swordsman competing with dozens of others for occasional employment. The work he finds is degrading by the standards of his former position. He guards merchant caravans, teaches sword techniques to farmers, provides muscle for business disputes that honorable samurai would consider beneath their notice. His expertise in strategy and politics, the skills that made him valuable enough to betray, become irrelevant when he has no position from which to exercise them. Worse than the work itself is the way he must present himself to potential employers. He can't cite his previous achievements because doing so would reveal his identity and his disgrace. He can't provide references from former associates because contacting them would implicate them in his exile. He must pretend to be someone with no significant history, no meaningful accomplishments, no connections worth mentioning. The psychological toll becomes apparent when you observe him from a distance during one of his stops. He sits alone in taverns, drinking cheapsake and staring at nothing. He talks to himself sometimes, carrying on conversations with people who aren't there, perhaps rehearsing explanations he'll never be able to give, or maintaining relationships that no longer exist except in his memory, his physical appearance. deteriorates in ways that go beyond the normal hardships of travel. His posture changes, losing the confident bearing that once marked him as someone accustomed to authority. His clothes become shabby not just from wear, but from lack of care, as if he's forgotten that appearance matters or decided that it no longer matters for him. His sword, once maintained with religious precision, develops spots of rust that suggest neglect bordering on self-harm. The most disturbing change is in his eyes. The intelligence is still there, the awareness that made him formidable as both ally and enemy. But its intelligence turned inward, analyzing and reanalyzing decisions that can't be changed, relationships that can't be restored, a life that can't be reclaimed. He's become a scholar of his own destruction, studying the betrayal that brought him to this point with the obsessive attention to detail that once made him valuable as a strategic advisor. When you finally stop tracking him, it's not because he's found peace or redemption, but because watching his slow dissolution has become too painful to continue. His punishment is working exactly as intended. He's experiencing a daily reminder of what he lost through his betrayal, what he can never recover, what his moment of weakness cost not just you but himself and his family. Yet even this seemingly perfect justice leaves you unsatisfied. His suffering doesn't undo your betrayal, doesn't restore your trust, doesn't repair the damage his actions caused to your family's position. It's simply additional suffering added to a world that already contained too much suffering. The balance that justice is supposed to restore remains elusive, because some scales can never be rebalanced, they can only be broken more thoroughly. The most unexpected resolution comes when you discover that some betrayals can actually be forgiven, not forgotten. Not excused, not minimized, but genuinely forgiven in ways that transform both the betrayer and the betrayed. This path requires a kind of strength that most people never discover they possess, a willingness to choose mercy when justice would be easier and revenge would be more satisfying. The possibility of forgiveness becomes apparent only after you've thoroughly explored all other options. You've planned his death in a dozen different ways. You've imagined his political destruction, his social exile, his spiritual damnation. You've lived through countless scenarios where he pays for his betrayal with everything that makes life worth living. And in each scenario, you discover that his punishment, however satisfying in imagination, doesn't actually restore what his betrayal took from you. Your trust in him specifically can never be rebuilt. That particular bridge has been burned beyond repair. But your capacity for trust in general, your ability to form meaningful relationships with other people, your willingness to accept the risks that all deep connections require, these might be salvageable if you can find a way to respond to betrayal. That doesn't require you to become someone defined by mistrust and hunger for revenge. The decision to forgive doesn't come from weakness or naivety. It comes from the recognition that carrying hatred for him is actually carrying him with you everywhere you go. Every moment you spend planning his destruction is a moment he continues to control your life, continues to shape your thoughts, continues to steal your peace. Forgiveness isn't something you do for his benefit. It's something you do to reclaim your own freedom from the power his betrayal has exercised over you. When you tell him that you choose to forgive rather than pursue revenge, his reaction reveals just how unprepared he was for this possibility. He spent months or years expecting your retaliation, planning his defenses, accepting that his betrayal would eventually bring consequences that might destroy him. The offer of forgiveness disrupts his entire emotional framework for understanding the situation. You can't, he says, and there's something like panic in his voice. What I did was unforgivable. The damage to your family, the violation of trust, I know what you did, you interrupt. I know the cost better than anyone, but I also know the cost of carrying this hatred indefinitely. I also know what it would cost my soul to become someone capable of destroying you completely. I also know that some cycles have to be broken by someone, and it might as well be me. The forgiveness you offer isn't unconditional. You're not pretending that his betrayal didn't happen or that its consequences can be ignored. You're not offering to trust him again or to restore the relationship you had before his betrayal. You're simply choosing to release your claim to revenge, to stop allowing his past actions to dictate your future choices, to break the cycle that could consume both of you if allowed to continue. His response to your forgiveness becomes a test of his own character. Some people, when offered mercy they don't deserve, accept it gratefully and use it as motivation to become worthy of the grace they've received. Others interpret forgiveness as weakness, as an opportunity to escape consequences rather than an invitation to transformation. In his case, the forgiveness seems to accomplish what threats of punishment never could. The knowledge that you chose mercy when you could have chosen destruction appears to awaken whatever remained of his conscience after his betrayal. He doesn't just accept your forgiveness, he begins the difficult work of forgiving himself, of finding ways to make amends that go beyond simple apologies. He uses his remaining connections and resources to repair some of the damage his betrayal caused to your family's position. Not because you demanded it, but because the forgiveness you offered made it psychologically possible for him to act from genuine remorse rather than calculated self-interest. He protects your secrets more carefully than he ever did before his betrayal, having learned through painful experience what it costs to violate trust. Most importantly, he becomes someone who understands forgiveness from both sides, someone who has received mercy he didn't deserve and who can therefore offer mercy to others who don't deserve it. His betrayal and your forgiveness combine to create a person more capable of genuine compassion than either of you were before the crisis that brought you to the edge of mutual destruction. But forgiveness doesn't erase all consequences. His family still bears the shame of his betrayal, still faces questions about their trustworthiness because of his actions. Your family still deals with the practical results of the secrets he sold, still operates in a political environment changed by information that should have remained private. The betrayal created ripples that spread far beyond the relationship between the two of you, and forgiveness can't call back waves that have already reached distant shores. What forgiveness does accomplish is the restoration of your own agency. Instead of being defined by what he did to you, you become defined by how you chose to respond to what he did to you. Instead of being trapped in a story where you're the victim of his betrayal, you become the author of a story where you chose mercy over vengeance, healing over destruction, the difficult path of forgiveness over the easier path of revenge. The strength required for this choice is different from the strength required for physical combat or political maneuvering. It's the strength to act against your emotional impulses, to choose long-term spiritual health over short-term psychological satisfaction, to prioritize the person you want to become over the person your pain wants you to be. As winter gives way to spring in the compound where this story began, you sit in the same room where you first discovered the letter that revealed your betrayal. The tammy mats still smell of rush grass and tradition. The incense still burns. In the corner, carrying prayers you're no longer certain you believe in, the distant temple bells still mark the passage of time with their bronze voices, though the time they mark feels different now than it did before you learned how completely trust could be shattered. From the perspective of someone living in our modern world, the samurai's response to betrayal might seem both admirable and terrifying. Admirable because it takes the violation of trust seriously, because it recognizes that some actions have consequences that must be faced regardless of how inconvenient or unpleasant those consequences might be. Terrifying because the consequences often seem disproportionate to the crimes, because the pursuit of honor sometimes becomes more destructive than the betrayal that triggered it. We live in an age where betrayal has been largely domesticated. When someone violates our trust, we might end the relationship, seek therapy, pursue legal remedies if laws were broken. We rarely challenge betrayers to single combat or spend months planning elaborate revenge. We've gained psychological sophistication in understanding why people betray trust, but we've lost something of the samurai's recognition that some violations of sacred bonds require responses that transcend mere practical adjustment. Our modern approaches to betrayal often focus on moving on healing, on not letting someone else's bad actions poison our future relationships. These are valuable insights, but they sometimes miss the spiritual dimension that the samurai understood intuitively, that some betrayals are attacks on the fundamental order of reality, violations of cosmic principles that demand restoration, rather than simply personal recovery. The samurai's willingness to die for honor strikes us as both noble and foolish. Noble because it represents the ultimate commitment to principles beyond self-interest. Foolish because death seems like an extreme response to problems that might be solved through negotiation, compromise, or simply walking away. But the samurai understood something we've forgotten, that a life without honor isn't actually a life worth preserving. This doesn't mean we should return to settling disputes through single combat or committing suicide when we fail to live up to our ideals. It means we might consider whether our modern emphasis on survival and practical accommodation has cost us something essential about human dignity and the seriousness of our commitments to each other. When someone betrays our trust today, we're encouraged to understand their motivations, to consider the pressures they faced, to recognize that everyone makes mistakes and deserves second chances. This approach has merits. It promotes forgiveness, reduces cycles of revenge, acknowledges the complexity of human motivation. But it can also diminish the significance of trust itself, making it seem like just another relationship preference rather than the sacred bond that makes civilization possible. The samurai's approach was more binary but also more honest about what betrayal actually costs. When someone violates your trust, they don't just inconvenience you or hurt your feelings. They damage your ability to form trusting relationships with anyone else. They corrupt your basic orientation toward reality, forcing you to live with the knowledge that appearances can be completely deceiving, and that the people closest to you might be your most dangerous enemies. Living by the code of Bushido in feudal Japan was like trying to maintain perfect spiritual purity while wading through a swamp. The ideals were crystalline, absolute, inspiring. The reality was muddy, complex, full of situations where honor conflicted with practical necessity, where loyalty to one principle required betraying another, where perfect adherence to the code would result in the destruction of everything the code was meant to protect. The samurai who discovered betrayal faced an impossible choice between competing values. Honor demanded that betrayal be answered with decisive action, but wisdom suggested that such action might create more problems than it solved. Loyalty to family required protecting their interests, but loyalty to principles might require actions that endangered those very interests. The code that was supposed to provide clear guidance for difficult situations often generated contradictions that no amount of philosophical sophistication could resolve. This is why many samurai lived in a state of constant spiritual tension, always aware that they were failing to live up to their own ideals, even as they strived to embody those ideals more completely than anyone around them. They were trying to achieve perfection in a world designed to make perfection impossible, to maintain absolute honor while navigating political realities that rewarded flexibility over rigidity. The betrayal you experienced wasn't just a personal violation, it was a confrontation with the gap between how the world should work and how it actually works. Your betrayer succeeded, at least temporarily, because he was willing to abandon honor in pursuit of practical advantage. Your adherence to honor made you vulnerable to his abandonment of honor. The very virtues that made you trustworthy made it possible for him to exploit your trust. This creates a philosophical problem that extends far beyond questions of personal relationships. If honorable people are systematically vulnerable to exploitation by dishonorable people, then honor becomes a kind of evolutionary disadvantage, a trait that reduces rather than enhances survival prospects. The samurai class survived as long as it did partly because it created institutional structures that made honor practically advantageous. But those structures were always fragile, always subject to being overwhelmed by people willing to operate outside their constraints. The curse of the samurai was the curse of anyone who tries to live by absolute principles in a relative world. They were simultaneously the guardians and the victims of the values they sought to embody. Their commitment to honor made them valuable as allies and dangerous as enemies, but it also made them predictable in ways that could be exploited by people who understood their values without sharing them. Modern life has largely resolved this tension by abandoning the aspiration to absolute honor. We've decided that rigid adherence to principles is less important than adaptability. That survival trumps ideological purity, that compromise is more valuable than consistency. These choices have practical advantages. They reduce conflict, increase flexibility, allow for more nuanced responses to complex situations, but they also create a different kind of curse. If no principles are absolute, then every principle becomes negotiable under sufficient pressure. If honor is just one value among many to be weighed against competing considerations, then it becomes difficult to maintain the trust relationships that made complex civilization possible. If everyone knows that everyone else will abandon their stated principles when the stakes get high enough, then statements of principle become merely tactical communications rather than genuine commitments. After walking through the psychological, spiritual, and practical realities of living with betrayal in samurai society, the question becomes personal. Knowing what you now know about what such betrayal actually costs, do you still think you would have survived the experience with your soul intact? Consider not just the immediate shock of discovering that someone you trusted completely had sold your secrets to your enemies. Consider the months that followed when sleep became your enemy, and paranoia became your most reliable companion. Consider the way betrayal changes not just your relationship with the person who betrayed you, but your relationship with trust itself, with certainty, with your own judgment about human nature. Think about the choices you would have faced. Would you have had the courage for direct confrontation, knowing that your betrayer might laugh at your formal challenge and call his guards to kill you where you stood? Would you have had the patience for calculated assassination, spending months planning a murder that would require you to become someone capable of murder? Would you have had the sophistication for political maneuvering using the same techniques of deception and manipulation that your betrayer used against you? Or would you have chosen the path of spiritual warfare, invoking forces beyond human understanding to destroy someone who had violated cosmic order? Would you have been able to live with the knowledge that such forces, once invoked, might not limit their attention to your intended target? Most challenging of all, would you have had the strength to choose forgiveness when every instinct demanded revenge, to break cycles of betrayal through mercy rather than perpetuate them through retaliation? Each of these paths requires a different kind of strength, a different acceptance of risk, a different willingness to become someone other than who you were before the betrayal occurred. None of them offers the clean resolution that our modern minds crave. All of them carry costs that extend far beyond the immediate situation, consequences that ripple through generations and across social networks in ways that can't be fully predicted or controlled. The samurai who survived betrayal didn't do so because they were stronger or wiser or more skilled than those who didn't survive. They survived because they found ways to make choices, however difficult, however morally complex, however personally costly, that allowed them to continue functioning in their roles despite the damage that betrayal had inflicted on their souls. But survival came with a price. They became different people than they had been before the betrayal. More suspicious, more calculating, more aware of the gaps between appearance and reality, more capable of violence or deception when circumstances required it. They survived by adapting to a world where trust was dangerous and honor was a luxury that could be afforded only when it didn't conflict with necessity. The question isn't whether you would have chosen the right response to betrayal. There might not have been a right response, only degrees of wrongness that had to be weighed against each other. The question is whether you would have been able to make any response at all, whether you would have maintained enough psychological coherence to function in a world where the person closest to you had proven capable of destroying you for the right price. Asterisk. The cherry blossoms are falling again outside your window, their pink petals drifting down like snow made from dreams, like prayers that haven't yet learned what to ask for. Each blossom that falls reminds you of the traditional metaphor for samurai life: beautiful, brief, doomed to end at the moment of greatest perfection. You understand now why the metaphor has endured for centuries. It captures something essential about the tragic beauty of trying to live by absolute principles in a world that rewards flexibility over consistency, pragmatism over purity, survival over honor. The cherry blossom doesn't choose when to fall. It simply fulfills its nature, blooming completely and then releasing its grip on the branch when the wind demands surrender. Honor functions the same way in human life. It's not a strategy for achieving practical goals or a means of maximizing personal advantage. It's simply what some people are, the way cherry trees are trees that blossom and shed their blossoms when the season turns. The samurai who lives by Bushido doesn't do so because it makes life easier often, it makes life much more difficult. He does so because abandoning honor would mean ceasing to be himself in any meaningful sense. This is why betrayal cuts so deeply into the samurai soul. It's not just a violation of trust or a tactical setback in the endless game of political advancement. It's proof that the world is not constructed in a way that honors honor, that the universe is not organized according to principles that make virtue its own reward. The betrayal reveals that beauty, truth, loyalty, and courage are not the fundamental forces governing reality. They're arbitrary preferences that some people choose to embrace and others choose to exploit. Yet the samurai continues to choose honor even after learning this lesson, even after discovering that the world punishes virtue as often as it rewards it. This isn't because he's naive about the costs or blind to the alternatives. It's because he's glimpsed something more important than practical advantage. The possibility that meaning doesn't depend on reward, that dignity doesn't depend on success, that the value of a life isn't measured by its length or its comfort, but by its adherence to principles that transcend personal benefit. The betrayal you experienced, painful as it was, taught you something that people who never face serious betrayal never learn, that honor is both salvation and damnation, both the source of life's meaning and the cause of life's greatest suffering. It saves you by giving you something worth living for beyond mere survival, something that connects your individual existence to larger patterns of meaning that extend across generations. It damns you by making you vulnerable to people who understand your values without sharing them, by creating obligations that can't be fulfilled without sacrifice, by demanding that you choose principle over convenience even when the choice might destroy you. But perhaps this is what it means to be fully human, to choose meaning over safety, beauty over utility, honor over advantage, even when such choices lead to suffering that could be avoided through different choices. Perhaps the tragedy of the samurai isn't that they chose honor despite its costs. but that they lived in a world where such a choice was necessary. The letter that started this story has long since been burned, its ashes scattered in the garden where they might nourish next spring's cherry blossoms. But the questions it raised remain as fresh as morning frost. What do we owe to people who trust us? What do we owe to ourselves when that trust is betrayed? How do we live with honor in a world that doesn't honor honor? The answers aren't simple, and they aren't universal. They depend on who you are, what you value, what you're willing to sacrifice to remain the person you believe you should be. But the questions themselves are eternal, as relevant to modern life as they were to medieval Japan, as pressing for ordinary people navigating contemporary relationships as they were for samurai navigating feudal politics. In the end, the story of betrayal and response isn't really about samurai at all. It's about the fundamental human struggle to maintain integrity in a world that offers countless incentives to abandon it, to choose trust despite the risk of betrayal, to honor commitments even when doing so costs more than breaking them would. Cherry blossoms continue to fall, indifferent to human concerns about honor and betrayal, loyalty and revenge. But their beauty depends on their willingness to let go when the time comes, to release their hold on security in order to fulfill their nature. Perhaps that's the final lesson of the samurai's response to betrayal, that some things are worth holding on to until death, and some things are worth releasing even when release means falling into uncertainty. Honor might be both salvation and damnation, but it's also the force that transforms mere survival into meaningful existence. Whether that transformation is worth its cost, that's a question each person must answer for themselves. Standing alone in the garden where cherry blossoms fall like time made visible, like promises that can't be kept, like trust that endures. Despite every reason to abandon it, the temple bells are ringing again, marking another day's passage in voices of bronze and memory. Their sound carries across centuries, connecting your choices to the choices of everyone who has ever faced betrayal and wondered how to respond without losing their soul in the process. Listen carefully. The bells are ringing for you too.